4 minutes after 10 is the time. Shall we start the week? Because we intend to go on by dangling in front of you a little tease that I will almost certainly forget to provide the answer to. Which prominent, for good or for ill, British politician was this weekend described by the Russian Foreign Ministry as an ally? I'll leave that. I'll give you... It wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. So which prominent British politician was this week described by the Russian Foreign Ministry? I'll say that again. The Russian Foreign Ministry as an ally. Do try to remind me to reveal the answer to that question before close of play today. But we will begin with the Conservative Party. And would you indulge me for a moment? Have you got a minute? Is that all right? Because there are days... I'm not going to lie to you. There are days when I wonder whether everyone else is sane and I'm the one that's gone mad. Do you get that? Do you get that? I say, you sort of think, oh God, change the record, will you? And then there are days, of course, when you are reminded by events that, of course, you have been doing your best to stay on the straight and narrow for the longest time, while other people have been going off on all manner of unbelievable tangents, which actually is pertinent to the question I just asked you about the Kremlin ally in British politics. But sometimes they do your job for you. Sometimes I think the right-wing media really do prove the point that we have together been exploring now for the best part of a decade. There are now dozens. And, dozens is a broad church, isn't it? Dozens could be in the low hundreds, but is more likely to be just in the high dozens. There are now dozens of associates, friends and family members of Tory MPs and Tory officials being investigated by the Gambling Commission over claims that they bet on the date of the general election before it was announced. Now, I'm going to play you that clip of Chris Heaton-Harris, again speaking to Nick Ferrari this morning, in a moment with a little parallel to sport and bets placed by professional sportsmen. But before I do that, I don't think it matters, does it, whether or not they had prior knowledge. If you are a senior Tory or junior Tory or even a middling Tory or married to a Tory or working for the Tories, you don't place bets on matters political. It seems to me to be a fairly straightforward matter. But the point I'm making about right-wing media is that I know Keir Starmer is the party leader and Angela Rayner is the deputy. So they have a prominence that you couldn't apply to this sort of catalogue of incompetents who are being... But the ones whose names we know, it's not quite the same, is it? But the amount of coverage that you got in the Mail and the Telegraph and, of course, their fellow travellers in the broadcast media over things that everybody paying attention knew were almost certainly innocuous. The confidence, for example, with which Keir Starmer talked about his curry in Durham belied the fact that he used to be the director of public prosecutions. But some sort of excitable client journalists in cahoots with Conservative MPs managed to propel that pyramid of piffle to such prominence that the police felt compelled to investigate. And in many ways, the same thing happened with Angela Rayner. If you counted the newsprint dedicated to an innocuous curry and 15-year-old housing arrangements by two Labour politicians and compared it to the amount of coverage currently being received by individuals, many of whom as yet unidentified, who appear to have broken a moral code in a way that, well, I mean, the best way I can think of describing it is that it's reminiscent of Boris Johnson's premiership. And yet, we find ourselves this morning having to rely largely on The Guardian and the I newspaper for a sense of its importance, for a sense of its prominence. So, and fair play to Nick for hitting Chris Heaton-Harris over the head with it earlier today. Let's take a moment to reflect upon Chris Heaton-Harris, currently Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. One of those politicians whose prominence relies entirely upon his support for the nonsense of Brexit. In fact, the first time I became aware of him was when he wrote to every vice-chancellor in the country demanding the names and I think course descriptions of every academic institution in the land that was teaching positively about the European Union or negatively about the idiocy of leaving. And that, of course, became the Daily Mail front page. Our Remainer universities, as dozens of Tories are investigated for allegedly taking a punt using inside knowledge on the date of the general election. The Daily Mail goes with the headline, 10 days left to stop disaster of a Starmer supermajority. So it was Chris Eaton-Harris who was responsible for the Our Remainer universities front page, which alongside Enemies of the People and Crush the Saboteurs marked a sort of hat trick of profoundly fascistic rhetoric being emblazoned on the front cover of the best-selling newspaper in the country. So the mystery of how we've ended up in such an almighty mess, of course, and crucially how the Tory party has ended up facing existential threat, while a politician who may or may not have been described as an ally of the Kremlin this weekend somehow manages to sweep up some of the detritus they leave behind, isn't really a mystery at all. All of the facts are out there in plain sight. It's just a question of whether you can be bothered to find them or look for them. But the scale of the story is what intrigues me this morning. The scale of the story. And before I play you this clip of Chris Eaton-Harris talking to Nick this morning, I would remind you that if you're a footballer, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if you're a footballer, you're not allowed to bet on any games, whether you're in them or not. I mean, it's one of the rules of being a footballer. If you're a sportsman, you're not allowed to bet on the sports in which you are involved. It doesn't matter what the law is. It's the rules. I mean, it is, I think, regulated, but it's a form of moral code. So the best defence this character has got, as Declan says, the worst Secretary of State for Northern Ireland we've ever had. And remember, Theresa Villiers had the job before him. The more you sort of look at this, or the more you listen to this, the more you realise what a madness we're currently engulfed in.
The Prime Minister's anger was apparent when, of course, this story broke last week, and he said that anyone who was found to be guilty would be thrown out of the party pretty speedily. One candidate, Craig Williams, has admitted he did it and he's made a mistake. Why is he still standing?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's both a principal point and a practical point there. Firstly, he said, I believe the quote was a few weeks before, that needs to be determined as to whether you actually had prior knowledge, because the whole point of this is whether you had knowledge of the data or not, which is what the Gambling Commission are investigating.
But he's admitted he made a mistake and he's apologised for it, which surely indicates...
Yeah.
So why is he still in the party?
Not quite until the Gambling Commission say exactly this. The answer is not quite, and they are independent of us.
So even though the man himself admits it, the Conservatives still have to wait for the Gambling Commission to underscore what the man himself says. Is that right?
No. So he said he made a bet, and that was a mistake. We don't know, and I don't believe anybody does know. Maybe the Gambling Commission do, but. And they have said they're not naming people and they're not going to comment on ongoing investigations themselves. But we don't know whether he did that with prior knowledge or whether that was just a hunch or whatever. And so until that comes to be true, or be found out, we don't know.
I'm tempted to ask Eleanor to cut that up and just remove all Nick's comments and just listen to a man going... Chris Eaton-Harris isn't even standing at the general election. So as part of the general election campaign, the Tories are now putting out a man who is not standing in the general election to defend identified and currently unidentified candidates and colleagues who stand accused of placing bets on the date of the general election using information gleaned from their positions of privilege. Now, a member of Rishi Sunak's close protection squad accused of the same offence has been arrested. He's been arrested. And yet the bloke who has admitted that he made a mistake is still running. I hate it when this happens, because the question I really want to ask you is actually one of the questions I say that no decent radio presenter ever asks. No decent radio phone-in host ever asks. Don't worry, it's not about parking tickets. The question I really want to ask you is, how big a deal do you think this is? And rules are, of course, made to be broken, and you don't have to be zany to work here, but it helps. The reason I want to ask you that question is because sometimes I need to recalibrate my political compass. So sometimes I sit here thinking, this is bloody huge. This is absolutely enormous. I can say with absolute confidence it's much bigger than Keir Starmer's curry or Angela Rayner's decade-and-a-half-old housing arrangements. And it's not being completely ignored by the right-wing media, but it's certainly not being turned into the sort of circus that it would be. Could you imagine for a moment what the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph would be doing today if it was Labour people accused of filling their boots? And the reason why I want you to tell me how big you think this story is and should be, should be. Remember, a policeman's been arrested as a consequence of exactly the same allegations that Conservative candidates, directors of campaign and dozens of other associates, friends and families of Tories and Tory officials. The policeman's actually been arrested. And I just have a sense that this is a sign of how far down the rabbit hole we've all gone. Should this be the only story in town? 0345 6060 973. How big a deal do you think it is? And the reason why I want to talk about it, well, I think that's pretty clear why I want to talk about it. But the sophisticated treatment, if you like, of this question, because the reason I don't like that is it a very big deal question is because it doesn't involve a great deal of thinking on my part. But let me explain the thinking behind the simplicity on this occasion. Carol Vorderman, whose third act has become one of the most enjoyable experiences of the sort of politics, showbiz crossover in recent years, and who now, of course, is a shining jewel in the crown of LBC's weekend schedule. But Carol Vorderman and I were talking some time ago on my Full Disclosure podcast about the PPE contracts. And what we both struggled with, and I think Carol would concede, it does open us up to accusations of naivety or even silliness, but we both struggled with the idea that when national catastrophe appears on the horizon, we would respond by asking, what can we do to help? Or by keeping our heads down and letting the experts get on with it. As broadcasters, I'd like to think that we kept you company or held the government to account or spoke truth to power. But outside of this weird profession, if you were in business, for example, if you were an entrepreneur, national catastrophe appears on the horizon. And a significant swathe of Tory donors and Tory supporters immediately ask themselves the question, what's in it for me? And it was quite reassuring, actually, to have that conversation with Carol, because it can be a little bit lonely sometimes in this business, holding the positions that I hold. And talking to Carol crystallised the idea that there's something, and I use this word advisedly, there's something truly sick about looking at the prospect of national catastrophe on the horizon and asking how you can make a few quid out of it. Now, listen, I'm not as comfortable with the supremely rich as perhaps Peter Mandelson professed himself to be a few years ago, but I certainly don't want a communist redistribution of wealth. And even if a communist redistribution of wealth was undertaken, by lunchtime that day, we'd have people with nothing and people with plenty. That's the nature of humanity. It's the nature of human interactions. And I am perfectly happy for you to conclude that I'm some sort of undergraduate snowflake, but I am disgusted to my core by the memory and the emerging details, despite Rishi Sunak's best efforts not to investigate properly, the emerging details of people often very adjacent to or contributors for the Conservative Party, looking at the COVID catastrophe on the horizon and saying to themselves, and presumably to each other, up to and including husbands and wives, looking at an imminent national disaster and thinking first, how can I make a few quid out of this? Some of the stories, Private Eye have done amazing work on this. Some of the stories of people buying mansions with the profits from companies that before the pandemic had no profits or didn't exist, making so much money so quickly by getting onto that VIP PPE lane that I kind of find myself thinking that this is like a pound shop version of exactly the same thing. Some Tories found out or knew or heard reliable rumours about when the election was going to be, and their first thought was, how can I make a few quid out of this? Now, the numbers are negligible compared to what was made out of PPE. But I put it to you this morning, in an outbreak of characteristic pomposity, I put it to you, my lud, I put it to you that this could be exactly the same thing. The only difference is the number of zeros on the end of the payout that they were poised and hoping to receive. And to that end, I don't really care about the law on this occasion. I don't care whether somebody who got a PPE contract with a 200% markup on a mask was breaking the law or not. They were breaking something that we used to hold dear in this country before Brexit and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Nigel Farage became prominent fixtures in our public discourse. We used to care about. Did we care about codes of honour? Did we care about standards? Did we care about morality? Or did we just not notice the people who see a national catastrophe on the horizon or a general election coming up in the outside lane and think to themselves first and foremost and fastest, how can I make a few quid out of this? How can I make a few quid out of this? Do you know what? I'm going to tell old Johnny as well. Johnny, over here, mate. I got a little bit of an insider tip for you. A little bit. You want to get yourself on this PPE bandwagon, mate? It's going to be trebles all round by tea time. Not quite the same stakes, old boy, but you might want to have a little bit of a flutter on the general election. Cost of living crisis? Poof. Here's a chance to make a few hundred nicker. I don't know, but that's why I want you to tell me. 0345 6060 973. They're calling it Gamblegate. I just want you to tell me what you think about it and how indicative it may be, because we are largely in the realms of allegation, although there has, of course, been one arrest, how indicative it may be of a broader right-wing malaise. 0345 6060 973. It's always sleaze, isn't it, that gets the Tories in the end. 22 minutes after 10. Remember, we have a little hook and tease running. Which prominent British politician was described as an ally by the Russian Foreign Ministry this morning? I shall do another one for you, which if you listen to this programme you may know about, but one newspaper at least thinks constitutes news today. Which prominent British politician appeared to compare parents bereaved by the Sandy Hook school shooting to left-wingers trying to curb free speech? It's a slightly trickier one, this. You'll be familiar, of course, with Alex Jones, the InfoWars host who was sued almost into oblivion by the families of dead children that he had accused of being hoaxers and actors. But speaking to Alex Jones, which prominent British politician appeared to compare those grieving parents to left-wingers trying to curb free speech? So two little hooks and teasers for you there. We return to this question. And do you know what? I might add to the mix this morning. No, I won't yet. Even by my standards, it's a bit too self-referential. Gareth is in Mersey Island. Gareth, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Why, good morning, Gareth.
So, first of all, I'm in my mid-30s and I don't profess to be massively knowledgeable about politics, and for the past few years, if I'm honest, I haven't voted because I've just always felt that they're all as bad as another. But this time round,
yes,
I have to say, I mean, I've followed your show and other shows so closely, and
well, hang on a minute. No, whoa! You can't say I follow your show very closely and I don't really care about politics or know what's going on, because that makes me sound like I'm rubbish at my job.
No, absolutely not. I think you are up there with the best, if not the best at your job, James.
You say that, but I mean, theoretically, if you've been listening to the show, you should have very strong political opinions.
No.
I'm joking.
No.
I'm joking. Carry on.
This time round, I just think with the Conservatives, it just seems to be one cock-up after another, one scandal after another. They more and more, they just seem to be in it for themselves. I think you put it perfectly. You know, they want to make a few quid, put themselves first, almost to hell with the electorate. You know, if they can look after number one, feather their pillows a little bit more, then so be it. And I just, it's the first time in a long number of years that, I've even, at home I've had conversations with my wife about how I just feel that the current, the last 14 years, and I just feel let down, James, to be honest. I just feel really...
That's a great phrase.
Really let down,
because
disappointed.
Go on. Betrayed.
And so this time round, I'm voting Labour.
Okay.
I just feel that Keir, I just think what he's been saying makes sense, and actually the slogan of change, I think, hell, we need change, James. I just don't...
And it has given you a temporary reprieve from the conviction that they're all as bad as each other, because, of course, he's got a year or two to prove to you that he isn't, and it's not going to be a foregone conclusion for a lot of people. But you focus my thoughts a little bit on this. So to you, this betting scandal doesn't feel freakish. It feels very much like the latest chapter in a long and ugly saga.
Do you know what? It does. It almost... When I first heard it, for about 10 seconds, I was, oh, gosh, that's... That. And then I was like, Gareth, come on, no. But actually, why are you surprised? This is just another Chapter 6, the betting scandal. It's just another... scandal, another reason not to trust. It
feels that way, and it speaks to what you described, which actually, you're very kind about my introduction, but you said in about 10 words what I was trying to say in about 2 million, when you just said they're only in it for themselves. It completely adds to that sense that they look at almost any situation and think, what's in it for me? Whether it is cash payouts or whether it's peerages. Daniel Hannan writing this weekend about, well, I won't spoil the surprise, because I think we've probably got... a couple of unhinged headlines on the horizon. Before you go, Gareth, is it Mersey Island or Mercia Island?
It's Mersey.
Third time lucky.
Yeah, that's right. No, Mersey Island. We're just...
no, I know where it is. I've been there.
Do you know where it is? Well.
There's a book festival there. I went to a festival there. Did it used to has it got quite good rock and roll credentials?
So there's a music... Well, there's now 2 music festivals, but there's a music festival being held there every year.
That's it. And there's a studio there. There's some big album was recorded there years ago. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I mean, I've only lived there for 7 years.
You're very lucky. You're very, very lucky. It's an absolutely beautiful part of the world. Mersey. Anyway, there's this lovely island in Essex. You should check it out if you get the chance. Thomas is in Ipswich. Thank you, Gareth. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello. Thank you for having me on.
You're most welcome.
All right. So, as a first-time caller, I'm quite surprised no one comments how nice your producer is when people call in.
How nice my producer is.
Yeah. Sorry if they start asking for a pay rise now, man.
It was Roxy, actually, the assistant producer. All my team are absolutely lovely. I think the reason that it doesn't get mentioned more is because it's just a given, Thomas. You can tell by listening to the programme that I create an atmosphere of bonhomie, happiness, warmth. They can't do enough for me, these people. They really can't. I'm so blessed. Anyway, carry on, Thomas.
Yeah, so personally, I do think it should be a big issue. I was quite refreshed about the hearing the caller previous. The reason why I don't think it's as big of an issue as it is for 2 quick reasons. The firstly is the more obvious leaning of most of the client media. I mean, looking at today's headlines, there are more pictures of Cara Delevingne on the front pages.
That's slightly different. I mean, that's kind of that you could have big political stories leading and then have a nice little side order of showbiz. But yeah, I mean, we're hearing a lot about transgender again. Which means that trying to resurrect the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn on Friday hasn't really worked. So they're not going to. And I sometimes wonder, Thomas, how clear that is to people who aren't paying attention, who would, if you were to base your opinion on the amount of coverage something got, Keir Starmer's curry would be a bigger story than Rishi Sunak essentially running a branch of William Hill out of the back of Downing Street, not running it himself.
Yeah, and of course that's listening to the interview that Lewis Goodall did with with James Cleverly, that seemed to be the kind of go-to for James Cleverly. Well, the Labour politicians were investigated themselves. Obviously, they're completely different situations, but narrative
completely
trumps
exonerated,
context.
and we knew all their names.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, there's hundreds now, according to the Times, hundreds of people being investigated, and we only know about 5 names at the moment. What's reason number 2? Can you remember, or have I distracted you so much you've forgotten?
No, not quite. So the second reason is when you compare this scandal, I know it is still kind of emerging, but when you compare this scandal to, like I touched on earlier, the PPE contracts and Partygate and any other scandal.
Partygate. What's it more like? It's a combination of both, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when you compare it to any of the other scandals that's been happening in this last Parliament, it almost seems quite tame to some people. Not that it is.
No one's going to buy a
yacht,
yacht, for example, off the back of the profits they're going to make out of placing these bets. Nobody's going to actually get... Well, we can't say no one's going to get arrested or get a criminal record in the way that many people in Downing Street did. Downing Street, of course, under Boris Johnson, became the address where more people received COVID penalties than any other address in the United Kingdom. And you're right, Thomas, it's Monday, and I was at Taylor Swift last night, so I'm a bit groggy this morning. Otherwise, I'd have picked up on the Partygate parallel a little bit sooner, but that is, of course, why the phone lines are open. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you also for your kind words about the team. It's 10:31. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. I mean, it gets the news coverage. It's my fault for setting the story up as an attack on right-wing media, because it is getting the news coverage, although nothing like the scale that Keir Starmer's dinner arrangements or Angela Rayner's ancient housing arrangements gets. It gets the news coverage, but what it doesn't get is the sort of fury, the provocation, the attempts to persuade you that something is rotten in the state of Denmark. I mean, the closest the Express gets today is that quote from James Cleverly that Thomas referred to a moment ago, that it's good news in the Daily Express today, that quotes, no cabinet members are linked to the bet scandal. So when we begin to examine the question of the tone, if you like, of coverage, not just the quantity, but the quality, I have to remind you that we're in a general election campaign. Maybe if we weren't in it... No, it doesn't work, does it? See, sometimes I try to do what could be loosely described as sort of bogus BBC-style balance. But then in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking, could you imagine if a couple of Labour candidates, Labour's Director of Campaigns, Labour's Director of Campaigns' wife, one of Keir Starmer's security detail, hundreds of others of people potentially linked to the Labour Party high command. Can you imagine for a minute what some radio programmes would sound like, what some newspapers would look like? You can't ignore a story like this, and as far as I can tell, nobody is. But the quality of coverage, as much as the quantity, it's breathtaking. And I want you to tell me where it sits in your mind on a scale that leads from PPE to Partygate. Is it as bad as those, even though the stakes are much lower? Or is it of a different order altogether? 10:35 is the time. 0345 6060 973. That's helpful, finally, from David. Your pronunciation, he writes, of Mersey Island is on a par with your dad's version of Morecambe. It's Mersey, as in the River Mersey. Cheers. Thank you, David. I shall now remember that forever. My dad's pronunciation of Morecambe. This is one of my favourite stories about my dad, because as I've got older, I've understood it to have layers that I didn't fully appreciate at the time. Because him and Mum must have laughed themselves silly about this, and I would have had absolutely no idea whatsoever. So you know this story, but just for the benefit of people who don't, because David's brought it up. When I started at private school, we didn't go on the kind of holidays that some of the other kids went on. Plenty of the kids went on holidays like ours, or no holidays at all. But you say something like that, it sounds like you're asking people to crack open their violins and join the VAT debate. But, kids would come back when I was like 7 or 8 years old. You say, where did you go in the summer holidays? I remember one kid, he'd been to Barbados. Barbados in 1979 or 1980. Barbados. Or Saint-Tropez, all this kind of thing. And we'd been to Morecambe. We used to stay at my Uncle John's cottage in Filey, which I always remember because you still had to put coins in the meter. But that year we'd gone to Lancashire, not Yorkshire. We'd gone to Morecambe. And when I was asking Dad about Barbados and asking what it was or where it was or something like that, and Dad just said, tell him you went to Morricambe for your summer holidays. Because it sounds... I didn't even know why he said it, because I thought it was pronounced Morse. So I go, yeah, we went to Morricambe. Morricambe. So I sort of small corner of Worcestershire, labouring under the illusion for a couple of years in the early 1980s that there was some sort of Italian Riviera resort known as Morricambe, whereas in fact it was Morecambe. 10:37 is the time. Irene is in Southampton. Irene, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Irene.
Hello. Well, I'm probably going to state some basic things which, are probably out there.
Nothing wrong with that.
But the media are so powerful. I think we all know that. And they can influence people. And unfortunately, I think a majority of people believe everything they read in the newspapers. And some
they're
people
they're a dying media. I mean, I worry more about the online stuff, to be honest with you. But there's a kind of marriage between the two, and certainly in broadcast we still follow, for good or for ill, the agenda that the newspaper sets, and that's true of all broadcast outlets, because that's where we turn to decide what we're going to be discussing, whether you're sticking it in a news bulletin or having a conversation like this. But this story, surely, spins the moral compass of normal people paying a modicum of attention more than a story about Keir Starmer's poppadoms.
Absolutely, and I agree with you 100%. And like you, I've been pulling my hair out thinking, when is this actually going to become, front headlines?
Well, I mean, I may have slightly, it's not often I have to do this, but I may have slightly done a disservice to some of the right-wing newspapers. It's not on the front of the Mail, it's not on the front of the Express, but the Telegraph have it at the bottom of the front page as a news story, and inside... But no, they do. I mean, they're not going big. 13 front pages about Keir Starmer's poppadoms, and no front pages so far about the branch of William Hill operating out the back of number 10 Downing Street, but they're not completely ignoring it. Where do you see it, Irene, in the context of the PPE scandal and Partygate?
It's just a continual load of abuse, scandal, and people that we should be trusting. I mean, honesty and trust are the two most important things that we should look at these people who are running our country. And I'll be honest, the Conservatives, I have lost complete and utter trust. And they have, in a way, I've lost my confidence in all Conservatives now, and that has brainwashed me in a way, I suppose, because I've become so disillusioned with it all that I've probably come up with this, where people say that people are all the same, not politicians are all the same. Well, they're not. They're not all the same. That is totally untrue.
What a very honest analysis of yourself that is, because
it makes me look at...
Go on.
It makes me look at Conservatives now, and I have this cloud in my head, and I think, corruption, dishonesty, I'm just looking after myself, I'm not looking at the bigger picture, what can I get out of this? And that has influenced my thinking of a Conservative.
Because we may be doing a disservice. We may be doing a disservice to some politicians, or even some Conservative politicians, who don't deserve to be tainted with this stink. Well, that is fascinating. I'm going to read you something, and I would remind you. I'm just going to check with Eleanor that I get this right, or with Keith actually, whoever's paying the most attention. If I say a full list of candidates in Clacton is available at lbc.co.uk/candidates, is that? Can I now say what I want to say and name a candidate? Is that all right? You'd think I'd done this before, wouldn't you, Irene, the money they pay me? But it's a better safe than sorry, eh? Belt and braces, because it's the Conservative candidate in Clacton, a chap called Giles Watling, who said, this is the last thing we need, this kind of story. Every time anything happens over the last 7 years while I've been an MP, it's not just the Conservative Party. Somebody in the political sphere does something idiotic and then brings us all down and loses any sense of respect. We've lost a lot of respect in the political classes generally, across the board, and this is just another one. I might dispute his attempt to claim that other parties are in a similar hole to him, but his central point is very similar to yours, actually.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm aware of it. I am aware of it. But it still has influenced my opinion and my, you should never judge a book by its cover. And I always try not to do that because, there are
and our
always
democracy
layers.
suffers. Our democracy suffers. I suppose, looking back over the last 8 years, we could have asked for some of the what we could call moderate conservatives, if such a thing exists, to speak up a little bit more loudly about what was going on their watch or on their patch. But of course, we saw in 2019 that was a passport to the Labour exchange when Johnson and Cummings were in charge. Irene, thank you. I think that's a very important point for us all to bear in mind, actually, that however awful the headlines may be, but the sort of headline events may be, there will be people, perhaps that chap there, trying their very best to be decent constituency MPs, and they are probably the ones who suffer more damage than any other by this kind of stories, because political opponents benefit from it, but disgusted teammates actually suffer. 10:42 is the time. Paul is in Maidenhead. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good morning, Mr. O'Brien.
Hello, Mr. Paul.
I got quite simple proposition. Let's ban them from politics.
Rather than banning them from gambling, we should ban them from politics.
Yeah,
I like this.
Obviously.
I like this a lot. You've approached it from the other end of the telescope.
This is definitely a case of incompetence. People in the movies, they saying, risk it for the millions, don't risk it for the thousands.
Yes.
They're just stupid.
Yes.
You must call it by a name. They are imbeciles.
Okay.
And now, do you want the imbeciles to be involved in the public services?
There is a problem with your analysis. There is a slight problem with your analysis, and I've got a horrible feeling that we all suffer from the same thing that I'm about to describe. And that is that if the rewards were enormous, we would be more sympathetic to the offence.
Yes, I'm obviously am. Because when I see VIP lanes, I can see all these people reach from nothing. I can see Boris Johnson, after his premiership, first 5 months, he got 5 million from making speeches. So at least I can see, okay, you made it. Whatever you wanted, you had it.
Also, do you know, actually, Paul, thinking about it, the PPE stuff, the risks are probably lower than they are on this.
I think they look at it and they thought, we are untouchable.
Yeah, I'll have a bit of that.
It looks like, I'm really big fan of Carol, what she's doing about it, and I really follow her on this one.
Good.
But it looks like they think and they write, they're untouchable on this one. Why I think so? Because if I would be Keir Starmer, I would make my campaign on it. I will get there and I will upside down every single document and I'm going to get every penny. That would be my line.
On the PPE?
Yeah.
On the sort of COVID czar who comes in and starts going through the accounts with a fine tooth comb. I've heard sort of intimations of that, but I don't know whether it is going to be explicit party policy. I don't see what anybody would have to lose from doing that, to be honest with you, Paul. And of course, in some cases, police investigations still ongoing. But I like that. I mean, the simple observation that rather than banning politicians from gambling, just ban all the politicians who've gambled from politics. That might be a bit easier, actually. 10:45 is the time. It is 10:49, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If I said to you that during the little junction there, Eleanor and I had a conversation in which we both said, I understand it, but I don't understand it. And it was referring to something that I have already mentioned on the programme. What do you think it would be? I'll give you one little clue. Kira, who's in Dodford, not far from where I grew up actually, has asked me already to talk more and indeed at length about the thing to which I referred earlier in the programme, and which the producer and I have just described as I understand it, but I don't understand it. Because I think there's a phone in there. I think we may even have had it before, but there's certainly one there now because of recent events. But before all of that, I mean, we are actually a little bit spoilt for choice. Do you remember the unhinged headline that we never should have done because it made a little bit of sick come out. Do you remember that? Even now, mentioning it. And I'm never going to repeat it, so don't waste tuppence sending me a message asking me which it was because I missed it. I think, was it last Thursday? And you can always listen back to the show on Global Player. But you don't want to. But this headline comes from the same writer. And even, when your mouth starts watering a little bit before you're sick, even looking at the byline makes me feel that disgusting sense I got when I read out that unhinged headline that we never should have gone there. But this is arguably, it's not disgusting in the way that the one that we never should have read out was, but it's arguably even more unhinged. And it is the first, but quite possibly not the last unhinged headline of the day.
Unhinged headline.
Gangs of feral youths rule our streets. Not even Waitrose is safe. I'd leave that without comment, I think.
Unhinged headline.
I've got another absolute doozy, but shall we save it for a little? Let's save it for a little later in the programme. Someone's resurrected Daniel Hannan. Goodness knows what that involved. It was scary enough last Friday, imagining the electrodes being applied to Jeremy Corbyn's nipples so that he could be revivified. But Daniel Hannan has come storming back out of the crypt as well. So we'll have a look at what his latest contributions. Lord Hannan to you, pal. You get a seat in the House of Lords for backing the architects and indeed the actuality of the disasters that have engulfed the country over the last 8 years. Which brings us back neatly to Gamblegate and where it sits in the PPE Partygate. What other scandals would you put there? Owen Paterson, there's so many. Proroguing Parliament, lying to the Queen, lying to Parliament, running away from Parliament after being busted for lying to Parliament and being rewarded by Paul Dacre with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds for a newspaper column. 10:51 is the time. Andy's in Limehouse. Andy, what do you want to say?
Good morning, James. Good to speak to you again,
Likewise.
sir. Could have done without the mental picture of Jeremy Corbyn's nipples, but there we go.
Yeah, well, this is, I speak as I find.
I've had my breakfast, so I'm good. I've had three words going round and round in my head all weekend, and those three words are...
Shake it off.
No.
Oh, no, that's just me then. Carry on.
Yeah, just you. No, it's honesty, professionalism and accountability at every level. That's what Rishi Sunak stood up in front of the door of number 10 on day one and promised.
It's incredible, actually.
Nobody made him do that.
No, they didn't. And he must on some level have meant it, mustn't he?
On some level, yeah, but it goes to show, that's how far, it goes to show how far he has failed. Since this broke, I've heard nary a peep from the Prime Minister about this scandal. In the words of Danny Dyer, where is the geezer?
No, phew, thank goodness that's what you could have gone for the single syllable that he also deployed during that magnificent appearance on ITV.
It was wonderful, but I won't repeat it.
No, thank you very much. Because when he came back for the second one, after, I forget, I think it might have been Susanna was going off on doing the grown-up stuff, and he just sat there on his own in the corner of the studio and just gave it another... Can't say it out. I love that moment.
Beautiful. It was
magical,
a beautiful moment.
Magical, poetic.
But coming back to today. Sorry if I may steer us back.
Yeah, if you must.
Where is the geezer?
Where is the geezer?
He has. Why is he not said anything?
Where is the geezer? Where is the geezer? He's in flipping Rome with his trotters up. Well, can we get this clip? We must get this clip with the bleeps because some people won't know what Andy's talking about, and it's one of the finest moments in recent political history. I have to correct you on one thing. I have to correct you on one because the only reason I know this is because of my fondness for IPA. So it was actually integrity, professionalism, accountability, not honesty, and indeed in that order. And you can remember it. You can remember it by remembering IPA. But yeah, what was he thinking of? What was he thinking of?
I think he was thinking of just saying whatever he could to present a clean break between the start of his kind of regime, as it were, or his iteration of the Tory party and the ones that had gone before. And I think that's how he, in his mind, presented a clean break between the kind of madness of Truss and the untrustworthiness of Johnson and all that had kind of gone before him. What really kind of just grinds my gears is the fact that he stood out there and said that. But I mean, this listen. What if? And I should write this down because we've
got another week and a half of topics before the election actually happens. But what if he's because he's taken a lot of criticism for being completely detached from the public, right? Mm-hmm. Completely detached. What if he's completely detached from everything? What if he's sitting in Downing Street, not having the first idea what's going on next door? Reasonably, that seemed to be what happened. That was his great defence during Partygate. Well, no, I mean, he doesn't understand that the people he's surrounded with are walking out of the room where he said, look, this is top secret, all right, but we're going to have an election on July the 4th. And they go, okay, yeah, my lips are sealed. And then literally they close the door and they go, hello, Ladbrokes? Can I? and then, Mum, it's me. You've got to get on the phone to Lad. Maybe he's got no idea what's going on in his own office.
Into Chinese whispers, and then Mum tells Dad, and then Dad tells the butcher, and then the butcher
doesn't cross his mind. Doesn't cross his mind.
No, it can't.
No, you're probably right. No, you're probably right. Thank you, though, and thank you for that great reminder, which we will play out. Although, actually, Rob reminds me that I do use that quote at the beginning of the David Cameron chapter in my book, How They Broke Britain, and because it's an audio book, I'm perfectly entitled to use all the words that I can't say. I really, really, really enjoyed that bit of the recording. You can probably hear the relish in my voice at the top of that chapter, but I'll play you the censored version shortly. The clean break theory, that's what it was, wasn't it? The clean break, that's what he was trying to sell, a clean break theory, and my goodness me. There's maybe a conversation to be had about whether the swamp that was not of his own making, in fact we've already had this conversation, was so deep that even if he wanted to make a clean break, he couldn't. It would be like trying to get out. You remember those westerns we used to watch as kids when the cowboys trying to get out of the quicksand? That was essentially the Conservative Party that Rishi Sunak inherited. But personally, I find that too generous. And as Michaela reminds us, don't forget that he was fined for Partygate as well. 10:56 is the time. Stuart is in Cardiff. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Morning. Let's start off with that Danny Dyer clip. Absolutely cracking clip. Brilliant.
Should do more political commentary. I must get him on full disclosure.
Oh, he's fantastic, isn't he? No, I just really, for me, I kind of woke up this morning, switched the radio on, having a little listen to, which way I'm going to vote on the 4th of July. And to be honest with you, this has solidified it for me. I personally believe that it is as bad as Partygate.
Well, it speaks to similar impulses, doesn't it? It speaks to, here's something really important, how can I make a few quid out of it? I mean, the stakes aren't as high as they are with COVID, but in many ways the risks are higher and the rewards are lower, which, to go back to Paul's point, makes them even more imbecilic than they would be if the risks were low and the rewards were high.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't know the details yet, but if there is insider information...
We know enough details. We know that a cop has been arrested, don't we? That's, and that no one has even been suspended from the Tory party.
No, but I mean, if it is what we think it is, essentially it's a guaranteed investment. And we're all kind of basing this on the fact that someone's put down maybe 100 quid, maybe 200 quid. But what if they've stuck down, 100,000?
It'd be very hard to do that. Political betting is quite carefully, because partly for that reason, because the stakes, the odds can be quite high, and which means that high stakes would wipe out a bookie. But your point stands. They might have wanted to. They might have wanted to stick a ton of money on it. I always remember that picture of Farage pointing gleefully at the... at what the pound had done in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit vote. And I remember wondering what he was so happy about. But you can, of course, move enormous amounts of money on political knowledge or political suspicion, but not, I don't think, on this kind of bet. Well, the point you make, Stuart, whether it's intentionally or not, is that what this story suggests is it speaks to the corruption or the moral dissolution of Partygate and the PPE scandal, but this suggests that they're not even very good at being corrupt.
Absolutely, and I think we proportion things, to the severity of them. And I think if the values aren't as much as the PPE scandal,
no values. And once values have completely left the building, of course you'd stick a bet on this. And then just before we go to the break, just for old time's sake.
Going back to this whole Brexit thing, when you're judging them on Brexit, they don't know nothing about it. Who knows about Brexit?
Yeah, quite.
No one's got a clue what Brexit is, yeah? You watch Question Time, it's comedy.
Were you no clearer when Jeremy Corbyn explained
No, I got
Labour's
the clue.
policy?
No one knows what it is. It's like this mad riddle that no one knows what it is, right? So what's happened to that David Cameron who called it on? Let's be fair.
I think you're referring to our former Prime Minister.
Yeah, but how comes he can scuttle off? He called all this on.
Yeah.
Yeah?
He has no regrets.
Where is he? He's in Europe, in Nice, with his trotters up, yeah? Where is the geezer? I think he should be held accountable
Actually,
for it.
I think that's
He should be held accountable for it.
It's a valid point. A lot of people do feel that all politicians...
That second one, you've got to watch the original to understand why that final bleep is... It's up there with Chaucer. I would have paid £1,000 to have been in the room when someone told, or when he was watching the news and Danny Dyer saw that Rishi Sunak had brought David Cameron back as Foreign Secretary and stuck him in the House of Lords. Here's a question. It's not one I can answer, Jason, and thank you for being polite. I think you could have been forgiven for asking this question in a slightly less polite fashion. Jason writes from Norfolk, as an intelligent man, well, there's your first mistake. Could you please explain to me why a few people throwing cornflour at a bunch of stones gets huge coverage in the media and a peaceful protest through the streets of central London gets almost none? And why Just Stop Oil should stop these acts when they grab all the attention that the peaceful protest should be getting? You, of all people, can't complain about the cornflour thing when you discuss one and not the other. I'll take a minute to answer your question, but I will think on, Jason, about ways in which to address the problem you describe as much as the point you make. Because the obvious answer to your question is that one of them is a phone-in and one of them isn't. I don't write news bulletins. I don't write front pages. A phone-in about why was the attack upon Stonehenge so much more offensive to so many people than attacks upon actual humans trying to go about, or the freedom of humans to actually go about their business, was a brilliant phone-in. I got a feeling from your text that you didn't listen to it, because it was really, really, really interesting. And it ended, actually, with the last 3 or 4 calls, pretty much where you are. It set my pendulum swinging. So in answer to the question about what a show like this can do, sadly, perhaps, the answer is it's about provoking conversation. So there is a conversation to be had about why we respond more viscerally to the protest at Stonehenge than we do to the thousands of people taking to the streets of London at the weekend. But you can see that it's not particularly exciting or invigorating at first glance. But I want you to know that I've read your message, and I want you to know that I will give it some proper thought, and we'll return to that question at some point this week, or we will certainly try to return to that question at some point this week, especially the bit about why on earth would Just Stop Oil stop the protests that many people find obnoxious when they get so much attention, and the peaceful protests that were undertaken by thousands of people, including all, the celebrity endorsements and the big speeches, got a fraction of the coverage that throwing orange cornflour at Stonehenge, which would subsequently be cleared away quite easily, managed to secure. It's a fascinating question. Thank you. And as I say, thank you for being polite. I turn your attention next to a headline I feel I've seen before. I've certainly seen variations of it before. A&E patients left waiting up to 30 hours for care. And you can pick your favourite. It's Channel 4 will broadcast tonight one of their excellent Dispatches programmes, which looks at one A&E unit and demonstrates what they describe as a shocking lack of dignity. You'll forgive me if I get a bit emotional, because my mum had a stroke a few years ago, and she was very well looked after, I'm delighted to say. In the film that will be broadcast tonight, a patient who had suffered a suspected stroke spent 24 hours waiting to be seen in an area called Fit to Sit, which is where patients are placed if they're capable of walking. That's it. Another had to undress and urinate into a bottle in full view of other patients in a public corridor while waiting to be treated. 400,000 patients were waiting in A&E for more than 24 hours between April last year and March this year. I think I have to say that again, actually, because the headline goes for the number waiting more than 30 hours, but the number waiting more than 24 hours has now hit 400,000 patients. Just do me a favour and think about the last time you went. If you didn't, sit tight, because you'll hear from plenty of people who did. Last time you went to A&E, So quite recent for us. I felt like we had a season ticket at one point. But what do you describe it as? There's two things that go on. Part of it depends on the time of day and the time of week, doesn't it? And also, I guess, whether you're in a sort of urban area, a built-up area, or whatever it may be. The sense that when you turn up fresh, as it were, you haven't had a lot of experience of A&E. You may have heard radio phone-ins like this. You may have noticed newspaper headlines. But if your opinion of accident and emergency is based on either presumption or previous experiences, I'd go back about 10 years or more, you would probably expect a relatively smooth passage through A&E. It's one of those things, isn't it, that unless you've had your nose rubbed in it recently, you're probably unlikely to know what it's like these days. And that's why I want to know what it's like these days. I can't quite imagine this. And the reason I say, think about the last time you were in A&E, I'm just trying to think. The problem is you do inhabit a bubble, don't you, when you're there? You build a bubble up around you. I was with a family member who had really severe stomach pains. And we got there and we got seen, and it was talked to the receptionist, and it's established that you're not. Well, I suppose they'd check it wasn't appendicitis. No, we didn't even get that. You sit down and then you see the nurse, and the nurse the nurse is essentially saying, "Is this life or death?" I think, aren't they? We'll hear from nurses and indeed doctors this hour, but I presume that first check. Is this an imminent case of life or death? I mean, is this the ultimate emergency? In which case we will escalate you. Otherwise, you're going back into the room and you're going to be sitting down in an almost a sort of Dickensian feeling to it, because the buildings now are decaying. The need for refurbishment. You're supposed to still be wearing masks, I think, in A&E. Certainly the signs are still up. It's one of the few places where the gel dispensers are still full. And yet that it's not even a fraying at the edges. What comes after a fraying at the edges? We can all recognise a fraying at the edges. What comes after that? What's one step after a fraying at the edges? It's when you find yourself thinking, do you know what? A lick of paint isn't going to fix this. It's just one step beyond the fraying at the edges. And listen, this is my experience. All A&Es will be different. This comes from the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital, this Dispatches reporter, where a reporter worked as a trainee healthcare assistant for 2 months, receiving 10 days of training to become that trainee healthcare assistant, and should not have been left unsupervised on the ward, but was. 44 minutes of undercover video will be broadcast tonight. You'll see a woman crying and screaming in agony while waiting for pain relief. You'll see all sorts of things. The elderly gentleman forced to urinate into a bottle in a corridor as he waited for care. You'll see the journalist Robbie Boyd, quite understandably, stepping over that line of objective analysis and describing himself as being so angry right now because if that was my parent having to pee in a bottle naked in front of 30 people. I don't, and I haven't watched it yet, obviously, but I don't think it's going to be a freakish experience, and I don't think that it is going to be the fault of the nurses responsible. I really don't. I know one day maybe we'll hear stories about nurses not being fit for the task, but understaffed, under-resourced, underpaid, of course, under constant attack from Tory politicians, and under constant pressure from the sheer weight of requirements. But what I want you to tell me is what it's like to be in there for ages, all right? That's all. We went home last time we were there. Stomach pain subsided. There could be an argument there for saying we should never have gone in the first place. But you know, don't you, when the pain is out of the ordinary and you make that decision based partly on how long you're going to be there for. We live around the corner from the hospital, so we're told you're going to be waiting 6 to 8 hours. We thought we may as well go home and come back in the morning, which is what we did. But that length of time in A&E, That's a lovely phrase. A tear in the very fabric, says Dave, who's got his poetic hat on this morning, saying what comes after a fraying at the edges. Dave humbly suggests a tear in the very fabric, James. And of course, the question of what it's going to take to fix it is one that Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer will be asking themselves, one presumes, on a daily basis at the moment. But what I just think we'll do that. I don't think we'll get into the politics of it. We're doing plenty of politics at the moment, and we'll continue to do so. But what's it like? Just tell me your story about being in A&E for ages. Listen, I know people like me have had good experiences there, and that's great. But we'll take that as a given, because this is a story about being in A&E for ages. And the point at which, this is, I think, the way into it. The point at which you couldn't quite believe what was happening. Because you get there, depending on how desperate you are, you get there in a bit of a daze, don't you, A&E? And then you're kind of, unless you're particularly sharp-elbowed or particularly experienced, then you are quite happy to be herded. You go through the motions. You queue up, you present, you're told to wait. You may ask, how long do you think it's going to be? And that may be the point at which you can't quite believe what's happening. They say, at the moment, it's 7 to 8 hours before a doctor can see you. And that's the point where you just go goldfish, full goldfish. What? And that's why, if you're not a habitué of A&E, if it is a very, very rare occurrence, like once in 10 years or something like that, that's when you go, I can't quite believe this is happening to me in Britain in 2024. 11:15 is the time. So what happened to you, and this is really important, I want to absolutely nail this down. What was the point at which you couldn't quite believe? You couldn't quite believe what was happening. All right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:16. I forgot, didn't I, give you that quick heads up? Which prominent British politician was described as an ally this weekend by the Russian Foreign Ministry? And while we're playing mystery politicians, which prominent British politician appeared to compare parents bereaved by the Sandy Hook school massacre to left-wingers trying to curb free speech? I think I'll give you both of those in the course of the next half an hour or so. But just to clarify for everyone who's playing today, spot the politician. Which prominent British politician was described as an ally this weekend by the Kremlin? I'll give you a clue. It may be the same person who blamed the invasion of Ukraine on Ukraine. But it may not be, so I'll leave that mystery hanging. And entirely mysterious, of course, is the question of which British politician has compared parents of murdered children to left-wingers trying to curb free speech. I'll give you the answers to that if I remember in the next 20 to 30 minutes. The question of... No, I'll come back to that a little later. Brenda is in Biggleswade. This is more important. Brenda, A&E. What made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
what
Brenda.
made me pick up the phone was 18 months ago, one Sunday morning, I woke up, wasn't well, did 111 because we thought it was a heart attack.
Oh,
all
Lord.
these, and what am I, 67. So all the signs that I was telling them was ringing bells. So I was lucky it was a Sunday morning because the ambulance came quite quickly. They ruled out heart by doing the test. Paramedics were excellent. But
This is at home they did this. They did this at home.
Yeah.
Right.
They did all that at home. But they said, no, there's something wrong. We'll get you in. I got into A&E in Bedford. Am I allowed to say that? I won't say the hospital, sorry.
That's all right. You can say what you want, Brenda. Don't worry.
Okay.
Even if you say something wrong, it's me that gets into trouble, not you.
Okay, that's right then.
What?
I got in there for 10:30 Sunday morning.
Yeah.
I got onto a ward at around about 1 o'clock the following morning, early hours of the morning.
Wow.
And during that time, I did see, it was a long while before I was assessed, and then you wait, and then you have this, and then you have that. And looking around at some of the people around me, I mean, I felt rough, but some of those people looked absolutely terrified.
Yeah.
And I was in for nearly a week, And during that week, I never got onto the specialist ward that I needed. I was in and on, an assessment ward all the while. The ward had run out of blankets. It was October, so people were cold.
Good Lord.
There was a couple of really old ladies there, and the staff hadn't got the time to deal with them because they were deaf, but they were coming and taking them for tests in wheelchairs that were broken, and the staff were saying to them, "You'll have to hold your legs up, love. We haven't got anywhere to put them." There was somebody came in that had got an ulcerated leg, and they'd got no pillows to elevate her leg.
How? I mean, I don't want to say how shocked were you, because that sounds a little bit
I was terrified.
Yeah, that's a better word. And the reason I reached for shocked was because a lot of people listening to this will be struggling to believe that this is actually happening.
No, and that's how I was.
That's what I mean.
The ward I went into when I first went in, they'd had to open a day ward to put people from A&E overnight because there were no beds. And that was quite nice. It was, you almost got personal attention because there were 2 or 3 nurses and there was only about 4 or 5 of us.
Right.
But of course, next morning, they had to empty that ward because it was needed. And when I got down onto this assessment ward, it was my idea of hell to start with, and I was frightened. And I now don't want to be ill. I genuinely don't. I mean, it was in the end the blocked bile duct, which was why the pain was so bad.
Oh, dear.
And the doctor actually said to me, "We need to do more tests." And I said, "Well, shall I go home and come back?" And he said, "No, if you leave it and if you go home, I hate to think when you'll get back into the system."
Because you'd lose your slot.
Yeah.
And you'd move around again. So it's about, I mean, was there a moment that you suddenly thought, I'm not living in the world I thought I was living in? So 16 hours in A&E, 16 hours. Sort of, I think after 10 seems like a nice round number, doesn't it? After 10 hours, you'd sort of think, hang on a minute, I'm having some sort of hallucination.
Well, you do, but you almost get, even in that a short period of time, a relatively short period of time, you almost become institutionalised. You sit there and you think, well, okay, this is the way it is.
Yes.
There's no point me getting het up because that'll make me worse.
And they are doing that. They are doing their best. I think we can
don't forget, unless you've got money with you to get a chocolate bar out the machine, there's nothing to eat for the day that you're there.
No.
And I did write to my MP. I did contact him, and he wasn't particularly interested because, I've
heard it all before, hasn't he? That's the thing.
Well, yeah. And the only thing he commented on was when I said the staff, I had 2 or 3 staff in tears. But when I said, but the staff were lovely, and he said, "Oh, thank you for that. I'll let them know."
I don't know what an individual MP can do, but it does tell you everything, and it's.
But they've got to. I know individuals can't, but it has got. I talked to my husband this morning about.
Governments can.
Yeah, I was talking this morning about the fish rotting from the head.
Yes.
Well, it's got to be the opposite way round as well. The good has got to come from the head, and the mending.
Yes.
Of these broken services has got to come from the head.
You're not wrong. I mean, we've been thinking about doing a phone-in on inviting particularly people in the NHS, doctors and nurses, healthcare professionals, to tell us about what needs to be done. But it almost feels like, the mountain's too high to start climbing sometimes, doesn't it, Brenda?
Yes, yeah. It's not down at the bottom. It's at the top, and I'm not talking about money.
No, there is something else going on, obviously, and what it is, I do not know, but what the consequences are, you've just described in really stark terms, and lots of thought-provoking insight as well. Brenda, thank you. 11:24 is the time, and do you know, the minute that Brenda mentioned her blocked bile duct, I found myself thinking of Nigel Farage, and indeed it is he who was described this weekend as an ally of the Kremlin by, indeed, the Russian Foreign Ministry, a spokesman for Sergei Lavrov, describing Nigel Farage, a chief executive of the Reform UK Limited company, as an ally, replying in the affirmative when asked whether or not he was an ally. This, of course, after he claimed that the invasion of Ukraine had somehow been prompted by EU expansion to the east, which displays either a deep ignorance or a deep dishonesty about the process by which sovereign countries choose to become members of the European Union. But there you go. So at least someone likes him out there, Sergei Lavrov and the Russian Foreign Ministry. Thank you, Brenda. If I bump into him again, I'll ask him what his secret is, because no danger of his bile duct ever getting blocked. Guy's in Richmond. Guy, what would you like to say?
Hi, Dennis. I'm so glad I'm not talking to you about Nigel Farage. But
no, well, you are now, you silly sausage.
Oh, no, I can't remember that one. Oh,
no, talk to me about A&E, if you would.
Well, another train wreck.
Yes.
Yeah, A&E. I checked into A&E in a hospital that is just amazing. It's in every other sense. But what followed was something that filled me with a mixture of awe and horror. I was triaged. I was in great pain, but I wasn't able to articulate what that pain was.
Right.
I was triaged, sat down, and it was 7:00 in the evening. Come 8, 9, 10.
Yes.
Past midnight, the place started filling up with people from the street who had nowhere else to go, and they were really interesting. I mean, I just really enjoyed sitting down and talking to these people, and it helped me to sort of get through my pain. But
yes.
Eventually, at 3:00 in the morning, I was brought into an area that was sort of in between the sitting area and the hospital itself, where you actually get some sort of attention and treatment.
Yes.
And there's this wonderful nurse who I'd seen before, just oozed competence. I'd seen her, 8 hours before when I'd sort of come in. And she sat me down and said, "Okay, we're going to put you on a drip." And she sort of set up the drip and turned it on, but it wasn't connected to anything, so it just leaked out on the floor. So she came back very apologetic. Not a problem. She hadn't put a cannula in, so she put the cannula in, but didn't stop it, and it spurted across the room. The blood spurted across the room, which was
holy moly.
It was just a bit embarrassing. She asked the doctor to put her finger on it while she got the cap. And that was kind of normal, and the doctor did, and then I was connected up. And then she turned on the drip and said, "Okay, look, you may, it's an antibiotic, you may have a reaction to this. I'm going to turn it on really slowly so that if you do have a reaction, we can stop it." She then turned it on and went away, and it all went through very, very quickly. She switched it on full, and when she came back, she said, "How come it's empty?" I said, "Well, you turned it on full. You said you were coming back, but you didn't." She oozed competence, but she was just exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely
she was
shattered.
Just
That's what I'm hearing.
Shattered.
What was the moment?
Everyone around her responded with the same respect
that
I did, the sense that this person knew what they were doing,
but
she was
dead.
just wasted.
Dead on their feet. What was the moment at which... Because it's interesting how many people almost have season tickets for A&E. And I've got a message I'll read out a little later from a police officer who spends an unconscionable amount of his time there these days. What was the moment at which you kind of found yourself struggling to believe what was happening? So there's the length of the wait, the exhaustion of the nurse, the condition of the other patients. That is not what you expect, and certainly not what you would have got 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. The moment where you couldn't quite believe what was going on around you, if there was one.
I'm not sure there was, because I was in so much pain. I was trying to, so it was all a little bit sort of dream state for me.
Yes. Yes.
And
delirious is
and
the
actually,
word, isn't it?
they relieved the pain almost instantly.
Right.
When they found out what it was, I just had, after an operation, I'd had a catastrophic sort of bladder retention.
Right.
And so I just wasn't peeing. Well, I thought I was, but I wasn't.
Got it.
And once they got rid of 1.5 litres, it was like,
And you were all right.
and then, middle of the next day, a bed was available for me, but I just wanted to go home by then. So
I feel sorry for you, and I think I'm probably fair in saying that you felt sorrier for the nurse.
And I felt sorry for her. I didn't feel sorry for me at all. I felt a lot for many people around me who were in much worse condition than I was.
When you hear politicians, and I'm thinking now about the party most likely to form the next government. So Wes Streeting is a regular on this radio station. It comes in often with Sheila. Do you hear people who seem to know the depth of the problems talking. The problems. My phone board is melting now. It's absolutely melting under people with stories comparable to yours and to Brenda's. But do you think they know the scale of the problems that they're going to be called upon to start addressing in a few days'
and there's
time?
a simple reason for that.
Go on.
They're responding to statistics. They're responding to what they know are lined up as events that are unacceptable. That's a long way from actually experiencing the life cycle, if you like, of an incident. All they get are the high points and the low points of an incident, but not what leads up to it and what trails away from it, not what provokes it and not what alleviates it. So all they get is a snap that is a statistic. And you can't resonate with that. You can't really understand it. And worse, you can't do anything about it unless you actually go through the whole process. And people in the hospital know this because they're part of it. They know they're part of the process. And they do their job within that role. But actually, the process itself needs fixing.
I think you're right, and echoing what Brenda said about, and quite often you hear people say you can't just throw money at it. Obviously, something systemic is in need of major change as well, and I don't know whether people hear calls for optimism from the opposition currently seeking to become government, or maybe some people have got grounds for optimism from the current government, but I don't know. Guy, thank you. Generous as well. The generosity to the people trying to look after you is admirable. Amelia Cox, how's your headlines? 11:34 is the time. I mean, normally at half time on a phone in like this, I would invite doctors and nurses to start ringing in and provide a little bit more context and colour on the question that I'm asking. But you won't be able to get through at the moment. I'll read this from Dean, who's a police officer. I know that because the first line of his text is, I'm a police officer, and we are often in A&E. I'm just going to check when I get to the bottom that I'm not... Dan, sorry, not Dean. So just making sure that there's not a request at the end of the message that says, please don't say my name on the radio, because I've fallen into that trap a couple of times. I don't know if you've ever noticed. If I go, here's a message from Andy, and I read the whole thing out, and I get to the end, and it says, please don't read my... And then I'll go, oh, thank you, John. That was a great message there from John. But no, this is from Dan. I'm a police officer, and we are often in A&E. Sadly, it's forming more and more a part of our job. Normally, we're there when someone is actively trying to harm themselves, and we have to section them for their own well-being and then take them to the nearest hospital. There have been many times I've been sat in A&E for 10 hours or more. Sadly, I'm off... So that's a copper off duty for 10... Well, not off duty, but off the streets for 10 hours. I'm often surrounded by patients that are laughing and joking and seem to treat it as a day out. I've seen people that have brought their own packed lunches with them. The person we've detained will often be laughing and joking as well, clearly not wanting to be there, and the medical staff will be trying to wade through a sea of people who are either not really that ill at all or don't want to engage with health staff. And while this is happening, there's often a queue of people in beds who've come off the ambulances that is literally trailing out of the door. The doctors and nurses are constantly stressed. I pity the person who actually needs emergency medical care and goes to A&E. So many factors here. Simon's in Chislehurst. Simon, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello,
I'm a bit emotional, a bit angry.
Okay, you take your time. All right.
It would have been my mum's 93rd birthday yesterday, but she passed away about a month ago. She had a fall about 6 months ago, and she'd been in and out of A&E ever since. I'm in London. Yeah. They're up near Liverpool.
Okay.
My dad's 90, so he'd been taking her in. I went straight up there, and when I arrived, my dad was like, you need to prepare yourself because you're not going to believe what you're going to see. I went into an A&E of a hospital, and it was like a war zone.
Right.
And there were people out the door, as that guy's just described, people lying on the floor. My mum in and out because they're on all sorts of different drugs now, and if things go wrong, you have to be readmitted. So my mum and dad both went through countless, 12, 15 hours sitting in an armchair. And what I'm angry about is my mum left school at 14 and paid tax her whole life, and that's how she was treated. And politicians have got a contract with people in this country. Right thing, and we work and we pay our tax. We're entitled to be treated properly and with dignity. And my mum didn't receive that, and I'm angry on her behalf.
I bet. And I mean, how do you even reach a politician with that emotion, with that anger? Because the danger is, of course, it's the people on the front line who are going to be on the receiving end of it. I know not in your case or your dad's, but the disconnect is enormous, isn't it? Absolutely enormous.
My experience was that people were good with the staff because they know the staff are overwhelmed. They're doing the best that they can in impossible circumstances. So I don't think people are angry with the staff, or if they are, I didn't see it.
So your mum was in and out a lot. Good. I mean, we don't want them to be. I've got some reports of unpleasant behaviour coming through, but I'd like to think the general acceptance is that they're doing their best and making the best of a terrible situation. So this is just massive understaffing and oversubscription. So everybody there would have liked to see your mum quicker and process your mum quicker, but because the complications following her fall were not matters of life and death, they can leave her in the chair for several hours at a time.
Well, I mean, you said you didn't earlier. You didn't want to be party political, but
Did I? That doesn't sound like me, Simon.
I'm sure you said something about this is a party political thing, but you can look back at satisfaction levels when the last Labour government met. My mum was one of 7 kids.
Yeah.
My granddad died in the 30s. He was gassed in the First World War. He was decorated. Her granddad was killed. Merchant Navy. My uncles were in the Battle of the South Atlantic. I had an uncle in the Chindits. I had one in the Desert Rats. They did what they were asked to do by this country. They all worked their whole lives, as did their kids. They've all paid tax. And one of the things that I think does bear repeating is the people at the end of the war voted for a welfare state.
They did, yeah.
And I think remember that when they're voting. And the Tories voted against the NHS countless times in the 40s. And I don't think they've ever been committed to what they call our NHS. They're not invested in it. And I know the line being trotted out is go out and vote at the moment. But go out, if you want a functioning NHS, the evidence is that you're not going to get that under a Conservative government. And it's not going to get better quickly under Labour, but it will be better than it has been. And I'm saying this on behalf of my mum because she did not deserve what she went through in her last months. No. And she'd more than paid for proper treatment in the taxes she'd paid from being a 14-year-old girl working in the 40s.
I'm so sorry for your loss. I really am, and I'm sorry. I brought it back today. I know.
But it's important that
of course
people can tell what it's like out there. It's just not. People are not being treated with the dignity that they've earned.
And I can't put it better than that. I never will. Did you got to spend some time with her? Did you before you lost her?
Yeah. I was up there the day because I've got kids, so I had to come back to London. But I saw her the day before she passed away, and the treatment she received at the end. The people are so compassionate. They're so hardworking. The people who work in the NHS are fantastic. And we shouldn't forget we were sitting outside clapping them a few years ago.
And banging saucepans. If it wasn't for the character of these people, things would be immeasurably worse. If they all worked to rule, for example, or if they all just kind of did, clock watched or whatever it may be, we'd be absolutely screwed. I tell you what you've reminded me of. I don't know if you remember, or indeed what your late mum thought of him, but do you remember what Kinnock said in 83?
No.
He said, I warn you not to be young. I warn you not to fall ill. I warn you not to grow old. And, of course, they didn't heed his warnings.
No. The irony is my mum and dad are working-class Tories.
To the end.
They think I'm a student lefty. So
muesli munching, sandal-wearing lefty. But, we're all the same, aren't we, when we present at A&E? Unless, of course, we've got... And at A&E, you haven't really got the option of going anywhere else. Simon, thank you. Can I say one word to you? Would you mind about your mum, if that's okay?
Of course.
It will be, because your dad's still with us, so I know it's the first time You've lost a parent, and I'm a bit ahead of you on that. In time, not now, actually, so it's only only last month, but that you will derive enormous comfort from the knowledge that she knew how much you loved her.
Thanks, James.
That will comfort you in time, I promise. Not yet, but eventually.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
mate.
you.
You mind how you
All
go.
right.
God bless.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Simon. Take care. 11:43 is the time. Sometimes even the best of us can forget that what our stories on a radio show or stories in a newspaper are lives and deaths for people listening. Linda's in Bedford. Linda, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm still recovering from that last call.
He's a lovely man.
I just thought before I start, I'll just say something amusing. I've just turned around the corner to come home, and there was a young person walking across the road. And, you know, you're always coming across young people walking across the road with their mobile.
Yes.
So she was walking across the road with a book, which I actually thought was rather charming.
But reading a book while walking over the road.
book.
Oh, I like that. I've done that myself in the past. If you just have to find out what... It's not to be encouraged. We should make that absolutely clear, Linda.
No, absolutely.
But no,
it made
there we
me
go.
smile.
Analog.
How lovely, how lovely. Anyway, I'll get back to... I've already been bawling my eyes out listening to Simon and
yes.
the others. My story is about a month ago. My friend, who is blind and bedridden, ended up in A&E. Now, it was a 3-hour wait for the ambulance, which was bad enough. The hospital that she ended up in, I went there the next day, and I seriously could not believe my eyes.
Yeah.
There were beds in the corridors were full of beds, so they were like lined up like buses, but where the nurses' station was, they were lined up next to each other. And it was, and I heard one of the nurses the following day say, "We've had 100 people in the corridors this weekend." So she was there from Thursday night until Saturday late afternoon. Then she was put into one of the bays that you'd normally go into in A&E.
In a corridor?
In a corridor.
Oh,
she is a rather large lady,
okay.
And so she normally has a bariatric airbed,
yes.
because she can't move. She was on the narrowest bed you could imagine,
So
and we kept saying she needs an airbed. Now, thankfully, because she had a UTI, and I do think back, and I think thankfully she was away with the fairies a bit.
Right.
So she did thank the doctor on Sunday morning for the wonderful concert they had, and she did explain to him that Bob Dylan had not come because he wasn't able to make it. So we had all that kind of thing going on, but I thought, actually, no, that was a blessing in the end, because it wasn't as bad as it would have been if she had been experiencing all the
just for
pain
people
and
who are
everything.
wondering, because I think when you said that, people might think that you're talking about the drugs that she was on. But you're
She
talking
wasn't on any
No,
drugs.
you're talking about a urinary tract infection
Yes.
causing hallucinations.
Yes.
And that's good news.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So anyway, so she was there. They moved her. She was in, and literally where the corridor was, when she was in the row of buses, every time they brought another trolley down, I had to try and squeeze myself in for them to get past, because there was only room for, it was two beds wide. Then they moved her. I think they must have had a system where you moved up a little bit, and then when she moved to where the nurses' station was, they were all jam-packed next to each other. There was no room in between the beds. I couldn't reach to go and hold her hand or talk to her or anything. I had to be at the end of the bed. And it was like Simon said, it was a war zone, and I've served on active service, and I just thought, I ended up in floods of tears, because I just couldn't believe this is our NHS. And I went and said to the nurses, I'm just so sorry that you're having to put up with this. It's unacceptable in this day and age, when we're one of the most, the richest countries in the world, and we can't look after our most vulnerable.
Well, yeah, but I saw a brilliant cartoon this weekend. I'm going to forget exactly what the detail was, but it was as if there's two people. One's got 12 biscuits and one's got none, and they're saying, "Isn't it great that we've got more biscuits than any other couple in this building. So we might be technically one of the richest countries in the world, but the distribution of it does not reach the sides of the NHS anymore. Why do you think? Well, hang on, just help me out briefly. I'm a bit late for the break, but
sorry.
No, it's my fault, Linda. Don't be silly. 400,000 waiting more than 24 hours now. Obviously, an awful lot of people listening to this will still think that these experiences are freakish rather than normal, or they may even be sceptical, or they may be trying to blame it on immigration, which is very popular at the moment, without paying any attention to the demographics of people most likely to need the help of the NHS versus the demographics of people most likely to be working in the NHS. But all of that aside, how do you account for it being permitted to happen over 14 years? Because I don't even know whether the Labour Party sounds as if they're fully aware of the problems that they're going to be inheriting if they get over the line in July.
Yeah, I don't think they do unless they've experienced it. I mean, I loved that Neil Kinnock quote, which I often think about in these days.
Yeah.
Often think about it because I just think that is absolutely it. And I'm, pushing 70, and you're thinking, like, for crying out loud, what's it going to be like? For me, and for people of my age, and you just think this is. Without being too political, I do think that people who don't use the NHS or our education system don't worry about it as much as those of us who do.
I don't think that's political. I think that's inevitable. I mean, you wouldn't, would you? And there are issues attached to the relationship between consumer and provider, that if you are insulated from necessity, either through education or health, and I mean, some health you can't avoid A&E, it doesn't matter how much money you've got. Some treatments, procedures will not be done privately. But you're right, you do think if it doesn't affect me, I'm not going to have the same relationship with it that I would if it did affect me. Linda, thank you. I'm very late for this now. 11:52 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm toying with the idea of what to do in the next hour. I shall tell you why shortly. But before that, Sally's in Clitheroe to bring us back to A&E. Sally, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello,
firstly, all my best wishes to Simon. That was heartbreaking.
Yeah, bless
the
him.
loss of his mum. So sad. So basically, over the last 15 months, I've been in A&E with my elderly mum 6, maybe 7 times.
Yeah.
Thank you. And as I'm talking to you, I'm shaking about it. It's nothing short of traumatic. Yeah. And I've got to the point where, me personally, if my phone rings that mum is unwell, I go into a bit of a panic now because I know what I'm about to face.
It's hypervigilance, isn't it? You're in that fight or flight mode all the time.
You don't want to look anywhere other than your absolute field of vision.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you just see trauma everywhere. You see people going through things they shouldn't have to go through.
So what happens? What's normal when? Go on.
So this time in February, well, it's been 4 times this year with very serious things each time, and she's formidable and she keeps getting through them all. Yeah. But one time in February, she woke up 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was clear she has suffered something like a stroke.
Yes.
We ring up for an ambulance, and we were told that it's going to be about 4.5 hours, and we'd probably be best driving her in. Obviously, with the fact that it was a stroke, you want to be there as quickly as possible. Yeah. We get to the hospital at 7:30-ish. It's like a half-hour, 40-minute drive from us. So we get in, and they triage her very quickly, because I have a friend in A&E who'd said the words to say to the receptionist. These are the key words which will hopefully get you into the stroke pathway.
Yes.
Nurse triaged us. She rang up a stroke team. They then declined my mum, saying, no, we don't think it is.
Okay.
The nurse was clearly upset about that and said, they've told me that you have to just wait in A&E. I'm going to go and speak to a manager. Then we were just, nothing else happened after that. I tried and tried. And
how long?
Said, no,
do you have any how long you're going to wait? Do you have any indication of?
Oh, sure. Well, I know already from my previous trips that their average wait time that they say to get a bed now in our hospital is 40 hours. That is what they give you as standard. I
just wonder how many people listening now have just, metaphorically crashed their car.
Well, or they just don't believe.
That's what I mean, yeah.
I just think that people, I've become that boring friend now that is just constantly, my life is just consumed by this A&E problem or hospital problems and obviously the doctors, the nurses. The last time we were in, I can't fault anybody, so it's not to them. In fact, I saw a couple in tears on one occasion. But we then go in. 6 hours later, after a CT scan, she was confirmed to have had a stroke. I had to go away from my mum because I just burst into tears with the stroke team saying, but is she now too late for the clot-busting drug?
Because it's crucial, isn't it? Yeah.
And she was.
Oh, no.
But my mum had lost all her speech, which thankfully now has all come back. She's made a just fantastic recovery.
I thought you were going to go. I thought you were going to go the other way then, Sally. I thought you were going to say.
It's been amazing.
Oh, thank goodness.
But me and my brother, tag team, we know we have to stay in A&E with her.
Right.
We know we have to advocate. I've not only advocated for Mum, but the patients in beds either side of Mum. I've consoled other people, and I'm not some, but you just, I don't know, I'm not some, I don't find this easy.
Okay, I see what you mean.
I don't find it easy, but you're seeing people, just such distress, in state of undress, in state of dignity is just stripped. But, all of that aside, what I needed to tell you was our corridors within the A&E are zoned. They've got pictures, they've got spaces on the walls now as if they are permanent wards. There are laminated sort of posters up saying you are in, with a happy smiley face, you are in zone 5, bed number 33 on a corridor. We'd gone through all of that. There was no corridors within A&E. So now the corridors lead up our main hospital corridor, near like the outlet, the sort of, where you can get food, where outpatients come, basically.
The atrium.
So they're
almost.
there.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're there. All the beds are up against, are numbered. When I was last in with Mum, I noticed our paramedics were staying with us for much longer than they normally do. And then there was more behind us, and he said, right, up to bed number 20 on this corridor, we have enough nurses in the hospital to hopefully take care. Past that point, there aren't, so the paramedics have to stay until they move down to bed number whatever on the corridor. So I counted 7 ambulance crew that were just sitting, having to stay with their patients.
That of course impacts immediately on people who aren't getting the ambulance in the time that they'd like to get.
Yeah, there was someone who crashed whilst they were there, and they just had to scream, get out of the way, and ran past everybody. And the police officer or something said before, I've got to say, I don't see people wanting to go for a day out. No. I have packed food to go because I now know.
Do you know, I wanted to pick him up on that. And I'm glad I didn't, because I don't need to now, because you've done it. You know that there's a 40-hour wait potentially, or you know that you're going to be sitting with Mum for the best part of a day, so you're going to take some sandwiches with you.
My mum goes now, she's got a lovely blanket that I put over. We take our own cushion. We take, things like that. My brother even bought a little camping, pull-out chair so that
Thank God for that. I thought you were going to say stove. I thought you were going to say stove then, Sally. I said, you can't be doing that. Heating up some beans. Yes, I bet
would be tempted.
But do you know what you've driven home? I know I'm going to run out of time, but the what I take away is the worry about the people who haven't got a daughter or a son like you and your brother.
She was 21 hours in that A&E corridor after being diagnosed with a stroke. You'd think that magic word would send you up. Can I tell you one really 15 second? Right. She recently had to be emergency operated on. She was in ICU. She had like a dream induced by all these drugs she was on.
Yeah.
a dream that the nurses had to come and sit with her because she was so distressed. The next day, in front of the A&E, the critical care consultant, she told us what the dream was. And I kid you not, she said, I had Rishi Sunak. I'm sorry about this.
Go on.
I'm sorry.
It's a family show.
Person.
Go on then.
She's not a violent person at all. Right. She said, I had him up by the collar. And she said, and my nose was touching his nose. And I said, sort it out to him. Oh. And she said, and his little feet were flapping off the ground. Honestly, the A&E, the critical care staff in ICU were just howling. So, yeah, that's what she was dreaming about as she's trying to recover from major surgery.
It's probably good for morale. Good for morale, that.
Yeah,
Sally,
let's hope
thank
someone
you.
does sort it out. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, look at that, and you brought it in almost bang on time. I just need to apologise to everybody waiting, especially Jennifer in Stilton, but also Brad and Martin and Chris and Dean and Kevin and Kelly and Candy. And I mentioned that just to indicate that this is a conversation we could continue for hours, but which we will inevitably and most certainly return to. The question is, does the next government whoever it is, have the first idea of how to fix some of the problems that we've just scraped the surface of today? It's 4 minutes after 12. I probably should have given you a heads up about what we were going to do next. A complete departure from what's gone before. So much love for everybody who rang in the last hour and everybody who was hoping to share similar stories or who's been through similar experiences and wouldn't dream of phoning a radio station in a gazillion years. But we're going to talk about Taylor Swift now. And there are a number of reasons for this. Let me start with the money. All right. How much do you reckon it is estimated that her tour is going to provide to London's economy? So she's just finished 3 nights at Wembley Stadium. She's set to do 4 or 5 more in August, 5 more in August. So that's 8 nights. There were 79,000 people there last night. I know because she said so. And that is, so 8 times, it's not far shy. It's a lot of people, but not far shy of 700,000 people, is it? Good God. And it's expected to boost the London economy by about £300 million. It's not just the money that goes through the till at the stadium, of course. There's the travel costs, the accommodation costs, the food costs, the hospitality costs. I tell you what, taxi drivers, Uber drivers, minicab drivers making an absolute killing as well last night. And it is a significant enough moment, this. Who else can do 8 nights sold out at the Wembley Stadium off the top of your head? Certainly if I was to limit it to solo artists, there's no one, is there, in that category now? How many did Robbie Williams do in his pomp? 8 nights sold out at the Wembley Stadium. Paul McCartney was there last night. I can categorically state he wasn't in the same part of the stadium that I was. Absolutely zero VIP action or backstage access. I was there as a punter, pure and simple. And do you know what? Sometimes I wouldn't have it any other way, because that sense of magic. Last time I spoke to you about this was in the aftermath of the terrorist atrocity at the Manchester Arena at the Ariana Grande concert. And I said to you as a parent that sometimes you don't watch the stage. Sometimes you watch your children's faces. And that was why that atrocity, that attack, was so gross, because it was striking at the very heart of innocence and joy. And we had that a bit yesterday, the innocence and joy, watching the children that just adore her. And what I was interested in was the phenomenal status that she enjoys. So what I'm not going to do is a manufactured... 21 nights at the O2, mate, is no, says Lee. You're absolutely right. That was Prince. Do you know that Beverly Knight did the after party with him almost every night? That is something I'd love to have gone to. Prince's after party at the O2. And of course, when you turned up there, you had no idea what song he was going to be singing. Eight sold out nights. You've got Ed Sheeran, Adele, Beyonce. Are we sure they could do 8? I don't think they could, lads. I really don't think that they could. And if she sold out all 8, she probably could have done 10 quite comfortably. So 3.5 hour set. But what I want you to tell me, and I'll have a go at it myself, because I'm not going to be one of those middle-aged blokes pretending not to get it. What I want you to tell me is why she has achieved a unique status in popular music, in popular culture. The atmosphere in the stadium last night was like nothing I have ever experienced before in my life. And I've been in Wembley for concerts and for sporting events. I've been at the Olympics. I've had the great privilege of attending some extraordinary events in my time, but this was of a different order altogether. A different order. How many nights did Springsteen do? How many nights did Springsteen sell out Wembley Stadium for? I don't think he did 8, mate. I really don't. And I don't want to talk about hysteria. I don't want it to sound like a negative. Gareth is helpful on this. He says, James, I'm a taxi driver. I've been picking up American tourists all week who'd flown over especially for Taylor Swift. I couldn't believe it. The last time I saw hype like this in London was when Michael Jackson last came to London to rehearse for his last tour. So a performer of that level, that absolutely extraordinary level. But what I find most interesting and intriguing is not just the scale of devotion, but the diversity of devotion as well. So what I want you to tell me, not as if I was stupid, although, of course, you can treat me as if I'm stupid if you want. How would you explain it to someone who doesn't get it, or someone who hasn't seen it? Why Taylor Swift has achieved a level... She even has her own radio station now. Our colleagues over at Capital she's got her own station, Capital Taylor's version, for the duration of her tour, visits to London. They just play Taylor Swift songs. I'm dreading to see the Ray Jars next quarter. She's probably taken a huge chunk out of my audience, such is the power of Taylor Swift's influence. And I spent, as a 52-year-old man who is there largely to enjoy the joy of his children, I spent the evening torn between a form of euphoria, a form of excitement, because you're caught up in something truly extraordinary, and a form, I don't want to say puzzlement. I don't know what I want to say. I kind of, you know me, I like to work things out. I like to have answers to questions. Why is Taylor Swift so popular? Well, that's easy. It's because A, B, C, D, E. And you can't quite do that because that's not magic, is it? That's alchemy. Something happens. So you could say it's the quality and the quantity of her songs. It's and she's one of those artists where if you've got children and you go along, you didn't realise how many of those songs that you've heard loads of times were actually her. And she's hopped genres as well, comparable in some ways to Madonna. Certainly when Reputation came out and it marked such a departure from what had gone before, it had that sense of, truly sort of genre defining. So it's the quality and the quantity of her songs. It's, the spectacle, the scale of the show that she puts on. The thing that I keep coming back to is the nature of the connection that she has with her fans. And I've got 2 in my house. I don't talk about my kids much on the show since they left primary school. So all I will say to you is I've got 2 children who are very different from each other. And yet they both absolutely adore Taylor Swift to a degree that puts me in mind of Beatlemania. And I looked around last night and it was as if I was watching that old footage of Beatles fans. Everywhere I looked. Grown women, mostly women, a very, very, very female audience. Not exclusively, but I'd estimate between 5 and 10% men. That may be a little ungenerous. It may have been slightly more, but massively, massively female audience. And the hysteria, in a good way, the kind of transportation that was going on around me, everywhere I looked. I mean, apart from dads like me sort of dancing clumsily and trying to look, 3.5 hours is a long time, I tell you that. As you know, if you listen to this show on a regular basis, it's like 1 me and half an hour of Sheila. That's a stretch. But I can't put into words what happens in those places. And it is all about how much of a connection her fans feel that they have with her. So I want you to try to explain it, both to someone who kind of gets it, me, 0345 6060 973, and also someone who hasn't got a clue what we're talking about. What is it about this young woman that has rewritten the rules of popular music? Rewritten the rules of show business, rewritten the rules of celebrity. 0345 6060 973. Thank God Keith in Plymouth is listening today. Here you go, here he is. I was there with my family on Friday evening. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I'm 61. I was a punk, so it's not traditionally my sort of thing. You can take that again, Keith. This was not a concert, James. It was performance art. It was theatre. It was a stage show. It was absolutely incredible. I even bought a T-shirt. You've got a 61-year-old punk going along to a concert, probably under a form of duress, and he bought a bloody T-shirt. When an American football player called Travis Kelce, who is currently courting Taylor Swift, came on during the concert, the noise in that stadium was louder than any noise I have ever heard at a Kidderminster any noise I have ever heard at an England international when Harry Kane has scored. Louder than anything that I've ever heard at an FA Cup. Well, I've been to an FA Cup final. I've been to Twickenham to watch England. I've been to, what else have I seen? I've seen Oasis at Wembley, a couple of other acts. The noise when her boyfriend appeared was louder, I think, than anything I've ever heard in my life. There was one moment when everyone just started screaming for reasons that I couldn't quite understand. I don't know whether something had happened. I don't know, and I forgot to ask whether or not there's a sort of agreed moment where every stadium competes to make the most noise with all the other stadiums, because I've read stories about some of these concerts showing up on the Richter scale. They're being registered in the way that normally only earthquakes are registered. And the noise, I mean, I can't describe it to you. Because if I say it was very loud, it doesn't come close to conveying what was going on, and that's not a noise you make when you are trying to make noise. That's a noise you make when you've been transported into some almost, I think, religious fervour. Fervour is the word I'm looking for. Fervour, and she's good, but that final leap from admiration to fervour. That's what I want you to help me understand today. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And Marcus makes an excellent point. I suppose when you go to a sporting event at Wembley, only half of the stadium would be cheering at one point. Not if it's an England game, actually. Well, to be fair, we normally have considerably more than half for a home fixture. Yeah, but you're right. You're not going to have that full, every single person, including me and Keith, wanting to be there, but being surprised by what we were caught up in. So that's my question to you. What was I caught up in last night? 0345 6060 973. What was I caught up in last night? What was it? What was it? What just, if you'd bumped into me walking up the Ealing Road trying desperately to find a car to take us home, if you'd bumped into me at 11 o'clock last night, I would have said to you, what just happened? What just happened? Who is this? What has she got? Absolutely incredible. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 12:17. So we'll work through this in real time together. I've gone back to, I can only find something in the NME from 2016. But it'll give you an idea. So Taylor Swift has sold out Wembley 8 times. You go to June of 2007 and the stadium reopened with the late George Michael. He did 2 gigs. Later that month, actually, Muse, crikey. They also did 2 gigs. Foo Fighters, crikey. They did 2 huge shows in the following year. They were joined on stage by Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, but 2 nights. Take that, mate. Well, they must have done as much, no? So, no, they did 4. Take That did 4. I think they might have done 8 in 2011 when Robbie joined them, when Robbie Williams came back So, yeah, take that of hit 8. Take that of hit 8 like Taylor Swift. Oasis, I don't think they did more than 3, did they? Oasis did 3. U2, how many do you think U2 did? 2. I remember that because they did it in the centre of the stage. They did it in the round. Coldplay, biggest they'd ever played back in 2009. 2. Robbie Williams on his own, a massive 4 shows. Taylor Swift on her own, 8. No problem. And I could go on. I'll just include Eminem and Ed Sheeran because I want to. So 2 sold out for Eminem and 3 sold out for Ed Sheeran. So she is in a class of her own. And the word I would use is not hysteria, because that is a pejorative. The word I will use is transcendent. So I was in the presence of transcendence last night, and I'm not given to hyperbole, particularly not in these kind of moments, but it was like being at some sort of religious ceremony. Such was the dedication and the devotion to this young woman. So why? Talk me through it. Louise is in Nottingham to kick things off. Louise, what would you like to say?
I just want to say, I think that the way that she comes across as making you feel part of her story, I think it's got a massive impact on her success. You're not just sort of listening to a singer or something like that. She's writing songs, and my daughter says that it makes her feel like she's listening to a diary.
Oh.
She struggled at school. She's somehow relatable.
That's the mad bit, isn't it?
Also being massive. Yeah.
She's cracked it. Because I love The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, the novel Catcher in the Rye, which is about an alienated adolescent. And and you read it and you think, finally someone understands what it's like to be me. And then you realise...
Exactly
But then you realise, this is why I mention it, that it's one of the most popular books ever written. So it's oddly, if everyone is... So it's not... You're an outsider, but you're not an outsider. So that's what she's touched on as well, I think.
And we went to night 1 at Wembley on Friday.
Oh, unlucky there. Didn't see Travis then. Bad luck.
And no, we didn't see that. But what I was going to say was, you're part of something massive. You're feeling like maybe as a teenager, like I say, I've got a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old. Very different, like you were saying about your children. Yes. But they both love Taylor, and they were both there singing together. It's bonded them.
Every word. Every word.
Yeah.
Every syllable. Yeah. I think everyone in the stadium knew every word to every song. Pretty much. Except you and me.
Yeah.
Did you all go?
No, I was there.
No, I mean, you didn't know every word to every song, did you?
Well, I don't know.
Not far off.
I think we've listened to it that much in our house because we gave it to them as a gift at Christmas. We've had, even my husband got on board. Learning the word. Yeah.
So they are part of her world, and she is part of their world, and not a lot of artists get close to that, do they?
No, and part of her story as well. That's what I think she tries to say. You're part of her journey.
She does.
She keeps saying she wouldn't be here without, her fans, and I think her fans believe that. Well, I think it's genuine. I don't know whether I'm just,
Well, that was my next question, and then I almost bit my tongue. I almost didn't want to ask that question. I don't think you could fake it. Well, I
don't know. It's too long. She's been doing it for too long, and I think that because her songwriting is so relatable, it's hard to fake that. I really
she's
do think
she's very vulnerable in her songs, isn't she? Which is probably part of the appeal to youngsters. That idea of if someone that successmal and that big and that massive can admit
they're going through it as well. Yeah.
These feelings and those feelings and hurt and there's something there. And I love that, the idea. You're a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old that probably bond more over this than over anything else. Am I right?
100%. Yeah. And it's quite funny saying about her showing her vulnerability, because it's something funny that we say at home when we're listening to her music, and we'll say, we shake it off. Oh, she couldn't shake it off because obviously, and we go, we feel sorry for the billionaire Taylor Swift.
Yes, genuinely. I know. Well, there it is. That somehow like humanity on a scale that we don't normally encounter humanity on, because at some point these acts become they transcend normality, and that so I'm trying to pin down what makes her different from other historical acts of comparable size. Problem one, there are hardly any. Problem two, well, no, actually, answer what main problem, there are hardly any comparable acts, but if you start to think of them, at some point they become, I don't want to say parodies of themselves, but they almost leave normality behind. I think most obviously of Michael Jackson, even without the allegations in which his career was subsumed latterly, he became, I don't want to even say freakish, but he just became unrecognisable. He did not inhabit a universe. He became spectacle. Not relatable. And yet this woman is, I don't know, she is so relatable. Kevin's been in touch. He says, I don't think you could have been more boring today, James, if you tried. Well, I'm tempted to take that as a challenge, Kevin, but I think I should just urge you to shake it off. Claire's in Ivor. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I was there as well yesterday. Now, I'm a 80 soul girl. I was half thinking about not going, but I wanted to have the experience with my 15-year-old daughter,
yes,
who I have to say, she was not in, as she said to me, or Taylor Swift's not even my top 10. And I was like, oh, great, I managed to get tickets. But do you know what? I have been to hundreds of concerts in my life.
Yeah.
I would say that is the greatest concert, showman, work I've ever experienced. I don't know what happened either. I was just 3.25 hours.
Yeah.
She was a phenomenal.
Why? Come on, have a go. You can't just ring in and say, I've got loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of experience of going to concerts. It was the best one I ever went to, but I can't tell you why. You have to try, Claire.
Okay,
you know how this show works.
I can tell you why. When I watched a number of those girls and the words, a number of girls were, I know a lot of people to be going, oh, silly teenage girls, but they were crying at some of the particular songs.
Yes.
They were. My daughter was singing some that had some relatability in
Yes.
her 15 young years.
Yes.
And I know that's what they were singing about. And that's the screaming.
They were singing about themselves when they were screaming the songs.
There was so much, and I think I don't know if it's because of we've been through the pandemic, because she obviously spoke about that.
Yeah.
But it was maybe they needed all that, these teenagers, and they've latched onto this person. And although she's this billionaire, she was showing some vulnerability. She doesn't take herself totally seriously because of obviously the amount of relationships she's had. She doesn't get it right. You know, she knows all the rumours saying she can't keep a man and all this kind of stuff. And but she didn't show off. She's not a show off. She was kind of like, you know what, I'm giving you quality. And I said to them, what was the score out of 10? They said it's more than out of 10.
So
agree.
so your 15-year-old was completely converted as well. She went from mild ambivalence to absolute.
But she knew all the songs and everything. But she wouldn't have been that's what I listened to constantly. She's got other people, but I felt like as a 55-year-old woman, I've had an experience of a lifetime.
Quickly then, why you? Because I mean, we've described what the teenage girls are responding to. What were you responding to?
Well, the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Of course, she did a brilliant marketing thing, giving us all those wrist things.
Yeah, but they all do that these days. Do you know, when you said that, I literally just checked. Anyone watching this on YouTube can confirm. I literally just checked to see whether I still had mine on then when you said that.
Mine is still on. Mine's still flashing in my bedroom. But no, I think she captured people because I do think it was genuine, her gratitude, because she's gone way past doing it for money.
Yeah.
She's doing it because she's an artist. She's talking about her recent writing. And I didn't know when the boyfriend came on, like you. I was like, what's happened?
What's all this about?
That screaming was like, as you say, it wasn't. It was bizarre. It was, oh my God, I absolutely loved it. And I will definitely go again because I cannot believe that lady.
What happened in that stadium is I think the only word I've got is alchemy. It is just and like you, I'd probably not been to as many concerts as you, but as a showbiz journalist for a while, I've been to a lot, and I can't think of anything that I'd even put on a similar page. In fact, during the news headlines, I'm going to try and think of if I've ever been to anything, whether it's a music event or any other congregation of humanity, where I felt anything similar going on around me and to a certain extent within me than what happened at Wembley Stadium last night. Thank you. It is 12:30, and Tim Humphrey has your headlines. 33 minutes after 12 is the time. I don't know how surprised anybody was to learn that Nigel Farage is the British politician described this weekend as an ally by the Russian Foreign Ministry, but he's trying to duck out of his claim that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was somehow the fault of the European Union. But he's done so in the last few minutes in a really stupid way. And now, listen, I know that treating his supporters as if they're incredibly stupid has been enormously successful for him over the years. But what he's elected to do is sort of exonerate himself by citing Boris Johnson also blaming the EU for the war in Ukraine, which, of course, Boris Johnson did in 2016 when he was telling countless lies about leaving the European Union, just, of course, as Nigel Farage was. I've said to you before that when the circular firing squad starts, it won't be as much fun as we thought. Now you've got Farage, who essentially helped deliver Downing Street to Boris Johnson in 2019, and Johnson, who relied upon Farage standing down candidates in countless constituencies to secure that 80-seat majority. They're now attacking each other. But they're attacking each other for being the same. It's like that Spider-Man meme. Have you seen that Spider-Man meme where you've got two Spider-Men pointing at each other? So Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are now accusing each other. There's three, actually, and who's going to be the third one? Don't go Donald Trump. So you've now got Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson accusing each other of being morally repugnant for doing the same thing. Just stop for a minute. I hadn't even clocked how daft this is. So Farage is now holding up a front page from 2016 that says Boris blames EU for war in Ukraine, and somehow using that to claim that Boris Johnson is morally repugnant, not him, because he also claimed in the last weekend and several times previously that the war in Ukraine was somehow the fault of the EU, which is a position of such pant-wetting obnoxiousness and stupidity that you'd have to be a fully paid-up member of the Vladimir Putin fan club in order to even enter... You'd have to be a fully paid-up member of the Vladimir Putin fan club to even entertain such a ludicrous thought. Boris Johnson, of course, put the son of a KGB spy in the House of Lords against the advice of the Appointments Commission, and Nigel Farage this weekend was described as an ally of Vladimir Putin by the Russian Foreign Ministry. So that's how stupid Farage thinks his fans are, that he's going to say, this thing that I've been accused of, well, Boris Johnson did it as well, and Boris Johnson is disgusting. Therefore, I'm not disgusting. Just run through the logic of that one more time before we get back to Taylor Swift. I'm not disgusting because the thing you're accusing me of being disgusting for is something that Boris Johnson also did, and Boris Johnson is therefore the one who is disgusting. And there is the consequence, if you like, of leaving this man largely unchallenged in public discourse yet again. And the answer to the other hook and tease from earlier in the programme, which British politician appeared to compare parents bereaved by the Sandy Hook school massacre to left-wingers trying to curb free speech, who could possibly stoop to such disgusting levels with the renowned conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, the renowned and disgraced conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. Answer, all together now. Yeah, that was Nigel Farage as well. It is 12:36. Goodness knows, I've rarely found the words back to Taylor Swift more uplifting and reassuring than I do in the current context, but... back to Taylor Swift. Anna is in Norwich. Anna, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I went to see Taylor on Saturday night.
Fantastic.
And I think it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had.
Good Lord.
Not just the performance, but also the audience.
Yes.
Because it's not just people who are fans of the same music. It's almost like a community. And at one point we did the wave across the whole arena.
Yes.
And when she was singing, it just felt like a connection between everyone there.
Yeah, I get. Can I ask how old you are? Do you mind, Anna? You don't have to tell me.
I'm 17.
Right. At which point, normally, I'd say, well, you haven't had that many experiences in your life to be getting excited about. But having been there myself last night, I'm 52, and I've never experienced anything like that before either. It is. What do you think it is? That you've used the words community. That's got to be a big part of it, hasn't it?
Yeah. and it's also majorly to do with her story writing within her songs. She almost brings us into it, and it's almost when she puts out a song, like some of her fans might be going through the same thing, so they can relate to it. And as she's singing, it's almost like she's singing not just to us, but for us. She's not just singing about her own life and her own experiences, but she's also singing about ours.
And that is, the bigger she's become, the more amazing it is that that's still true in a way. Because what do you have in common with, one of the most famous, wealthy, successful women in the world? I mean, how can our life intersect with hers? And yet her great triumph is that it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really does. She speaks to you, and she speaks, I think, about you.
It's almost like she's, even when she's written songs where she's the narrator of another story.
Yes, they're my favourites.
Yeah, we become part of that story because we can relate to certain messages or certain characters that she's created.
Who did you go with?
My parents and my sister.
And what was that kind of bonding experience like? Were both of your parents enraptured, or and is your sister older or younger than you?
My sister's older. She was crying when when Taylor first came on. And even my parents, they're not like the biggest hardcore fans of Taylor Swift,
sure.
But even they just thought it was so amazing, and her performance is so professional and so high quality.
The momentum was what got me, because it's so long, and when she announced how long it was going to be, I'm not going to lie to you, Anna, there was a little bit of me that went, oh, flipping heck, no one warned me. I don't think I've ever been to a 3.5 hour concert before, so I was expecting it to flag, but it didn't, did it? She that was what I found technically most impressive. When we sort of step away from the transcendent or whatever word it is that we're using, she just, it was a masterpiece, but it lasted for 3.5 hours.
I think the show kind of takes you out of
that's exactly
the rest of the world. And I was wearing like high-heeled boots, and they were not comfortable, but because I was so enraptured by her performance, I forgot about it.
Yeah. I mean, what a great compliment to say. How uncomfortable were they?
Yeah, they were pretty bad. But...
Thank you, Anna. I think you've reached parts that other callers hadn't quite managed to reach, and which I certainly hadn't managed to reach, because that enraptured or transported, and I'm afraid to say that I was well aware. 3.5 hours on your feet is a long time, even if you're wearing, scruffy old trainers. But I'm conscious of my feet this morning, and I'm afraid I was conscious of them last night, even if you weren't. Thank you, Anna. Charlotte's in Stone in Staffordshire. Charlotte, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. Absolutely love her. It's been so lovely to hear all these calls about her. But I wasn't a Taylor Swift fan as big as I am now before the Eras tour. I saw sort of on TikTok and on social media so many people getting excited about going to the Eras tour, and sort of the whole culture around, what you're going to wear, or like the friendship bracelets. And it's something that I wanted to almost be a part of. And I think that's what the main reason I actually sort of got into Taylor Swift and sort of had that investment in the first place with her, because it was like a culture and almost like a trend to be at a Taylor Swift concert and be there with everybody else. And I don't think if it wasn't for the effect that social media and TikTok has, I don't think a lot of people either maybe would have also had that desire to go. And
So that's the thing that is also interesting to me, is the escalation, the way that it still feels like it hasn't peaked. And there have been times in the past watching my daughters where I've thought, well, they'll move on to something else now. And they have, but they've never moved away from Taylor Swift. So that's what you're describing. Because when she started, TikTok wasn't even a thing, was it, really? And yet now all the bracelets and all the kind of culture attached to the concert has moved it into a new space, not moved it up a notch.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that in social media and the effect that it has on sort of people being exposed to that and just wanting to be a part of that whole thing is why a lot of people now like her. But that doesn't detract from the fact that she, you know, is an amazing artist and she definitely deserves all of the popularity that she has.
There's no doubt about that. And the management of the career is off the charts as well, to a point where something Lana Del Rey said quite recently is probably pertinent. Where's this from? This is a piece of the Guardian reviewer, I think, picked up on this. When they said that when Lana Del Rey, who's worked with Taylor Swift, was asked why her friend is so popular, she just said she wants it. She's told me so many times that she wants it more than anyone. It was the BBC that asked her this question, actually, and how amazing. She's getting exactly what she wants. She's driven, and I think it's really paid off. Now, you step outside the euphoria or whatever you want to call it of last night's concert, and there you have, in this article, what they describe as, I don't want to say the cynical side of it, but the painstaking connection, the painstaking concern taken over every aspect of the career. This journalist wrote it up as maintaining a veneer of unflappable benevolence that obfuscates her admirable business savvy and clear understanding of what her fans and the music business at large want. Del Rey was saying the quiet part out loud. Swift's success may, at its core, come down to her preternatural musical ability. Because we've not really said enough about that. All killer, no filler. But her maintenance of that success was aided by intense ambition. Now, I haven't got the journalist's name on this article, but I don't think I've read an article like that about a man, where they almost try to cast the intense ambition as a negative. I just don't think I'd ever read that about a man. A man who's got intense ambition is a don. A woman who's got intense ambition is, that's saying the quiet part out loud. And it is 12:47. How often do we do this? I mean, that's part of the phenomenon that we're describing, isn't it? When's the last time we did an hour on a popular culture act? I've come up... Did we do one on Beyonce? I don't think we did. If we did, it was only because you made me. I wouldn't have. It was because you made me. Well, you see, it's a nice relationship that we have working on this programme together. Did you really make me do an hour on Beyonce? I can't name a single Beyonce track. Was I still calling her Beyonce at the time? I can't think of anything. I really can't. So I saw the Pope. Abbot was good. We did Abbot after I don't get out much, but when I do, I sort of managed to squeeze an hour of radio. No, the Abbot thing was interesting because that was A, phenomenal, and B, it's 50 years. So I was trying in the junction there to think of something that I would say was comparable. That's why I mentioned the Pope. I saw the Pope in Coventry when I was a kid. So I think I did. I may have misremembered it. I have to check with my mum after the show. I think I sang. I think I was in... I couldn't know. You'd remember that, wouldn't you? Anyway, it obviously didn't make that much of an impression on me if it did happen. So I saw the Pope. I saw Oasis in their pomp at Wembley. I saw Leonard Cohen at the O2 doing that big... That was mad. But, I mean, there's nothing even close. I saw Kidderminster Harriers win... all right. Apart from Kidderminster Harriers winning promotion to the National League at the end of the season before last, apart from that, I've never witnessed anything like the 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium last night. No, I'm joking, obviously. Kidderminster was much more impressive. So no, I can't think of anything like it. And that's part of the reason why we're having a conversation about what it is exactly that she represents. 12:49 is the time. Hazel is in Edinburgh. Hazel, what do you think?
Hi, James. Yeah, I also went to her concert. I was there the first night she played Edinburgh. Not a massive Swiftie, but I just felt like I wanted to go and see it. And I agree with what the other callers have been saying about her music being so relatable. Like, everybody's had a heartbreak or someone do them wrong. But I think as well, another thing for me is how she conducts herself as a human. I think about some of the things where Taylor has stood up for her rights as a woman, her rights as an artist, is well documented, her issues with being able to own the rights to her own music and the way she stuck up for that. when Spotify and Apple Music were not going to give artists the right royalties. She stood up for that and said, look, I'm not going to put my music on your platforms. And the platforms all went, oh, hang on a minute, we better pay attention. Like, this is important. I think about when Calvin Harris wasn't going to give her credit for being on his track. And again, when things like that happen, she just sits back quietly and doesn't get involved in the drama and waits until someone else stands up for her and says, actually, Taylor was on that, or Taylor didn't do that. And I think the way she conducts herself as a person, like, people can really get on board with. And for me, I think that's part of the phenomenon that is Taylor Swift.
Is she a bit scary?
I don't think she's scary, but I think people understand.
You wouldn't mess with her because we haven't touched on what Taylor's version means, have we? But it fits very much with where you're coming from on this.
Yes.
When the rights to her back catalogue were bought by a executive with whom she had fallen out, or with whom she had what I believe the kids call beef, and that's why she's recorded her own albums again, so that the masters, if you like, that's never happened before, so that the masters become her property. Yeah. And that's what Taylor's version means. If you see in brackets Taylor's version, it's because she did it all again.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, for someone to go out and put all of that effort in, and just, like, the way she just stands up for herself, again, I think people relate to that. Like, who's not had someone do them wrong? But to see someone, especially a woman, like, as a woman, seeing a woman do that, you're just like, actually, we can do it. We can stand up for ourselves. And look what she's done, all the work she's put in to do that.
Awesome is a better word. The literal meaning of awesome, as opposed to scary, or as in awe-inspiring. Awesome. And you know, how old is she? She's, 34, is she?
Yeah, in her 30s, yeah.
What the hell does she do now? I mean, what does she do for the next 20 or 30 years? What are we going to be here? And just when she's my age, what are we going to be taught? It is breathtaking, isn't it? But you're right. I think that sense of taking no nonsense and being absolutely dedicated to protecting herself, really, in the face of unpleasantness, whether it's her love life or her commercial life, is inspiring. I like this from Emma. Every spiritual, religious or ecstatic experience that I've ever read about involves that sense of joining, of being assimilated into the sense of a larger power or a greater entity. Many humans spend their entire lives seeking desperately to join this. A completeness, an awareness of a sense of missing their connection with it the rest of the time, possibly pushing them into trying to create that connection through chemical or emotional misbehavior. Swift has obviously hit the sweet spot of collectiveness. That's probably the closest thing I could come to, was like the massive raves of the late 80s, early 90s, where you would look around a field or Delamere Forest or the Hacienda nightclub, and you would feel that you were part of some mad tribal ceremony. But of course, almost everybody in those rooms was absolutely off their box, which was categorically not the case at Wembley Stadium last night, or indeed, for the record, in my case, on those occasions. 12:53 is the time. Kelly's in Broadstairs. Kelly, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hello. I had to call in because as soon as you said the question, I laughed to myself because I actually asked my daughter this same question a few days ago.
What exactly is it? What's it all about?
Exactly, because she's constantly playing Taylor Swift. You know, she's obsessed with her. She's 14, and I said to her, "What is it?"
Yeah.
And she said to me, for her, it gives her self-acceptance, that she can be unapologetically who she is, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's what she gets.
Did you ever
from
get
Taylor
that?
Swift
Was there an
music.
artist who made you feel that way ever?
I have to say, I grew up listening to Gloria Estefan.
Yeah.
And I remember going to one of her concerts with my sister and my mum and standing there at 17 singing every word and having people older than me look at me and just say, how on earth do you know all the words to these songs? You're far too young. But it did. It gave me that sense of, you know, almost like the words sort of entice you, and the more you repeat it, the more you kind of believe it. Really,
Okay. So I don't know whether you've picked up on this. I suspect you probably have. But the longer the conversation has gone on, the more it sounded like we're talking about a religion or a religious ceremony. And what you've just said is like chanting, because I hadn't pinned that down yet. That's why an earlier caller talked about they weren't just singing the songs, they were bellowing the songs, all in unison together, which is what creates that. I mean, it affects your heart, doesn't it? It affects your heart rate.
Absolutely.
And it was more like chanting than singing at some points. Have you seen her live? Have you seen her live? Have you been?
I haven't, no.
Well,
I must admit I was that bad parent that didn't quite get those tickets
No, it's
time.
not. I mean, you couldn't do it unless you had the codes from pre-ordering the last album. You didn't really have a hope in hell of getting in that.
Exactly.
So you'll know for now. And that's a little reminder of what a ruthless businesswoman she is. And yet none of the fans seem to care a jot about that. I think that's just the parents.
Definitely, but I mean, my daughter, she's 14, and when you meet her, well, when anyone meets her, she isn't your average 14-year-old. You know, she's a book reader. Yeah. She doesn't carry her phone. She's always got her head in a book. She's very academic by choice, yes. And she has joined secondary school. Realising very quickly that that's not cool. That's not, they're not children that fit in, and the music for her has given her that sense of belief that she can be whoever she wants. And, when she doesn't fit in and when she doesn't fit the image, that music gives her the belief that it doesn't matter.
That she can be who she wants to be. Yes, I love that. And good luck to her. And what an amazing gift to have been given by an artist, that sense of confidence in who you are. That's why I mentioned Catcher in the Rye a little earlier in the programme, I think, and the similar sense of sort of normalising alienation almost as it was. A few of you have picked up on this. I'm not fully across it, John, and others, but I know that there is quite a lot of reportage in America about the role that she may play in the presidential election, isn't there? I saw one story that I had to double check to make sure it was true, claiming that Donald Trump's camp were going to defuse Taylor Swift's potential support for Joe Biden by bringing Kid Rock into the equation. And I thought that just can't be right on any amount. Okay, in the red corner, Taylor Swift. In the blue corner, no. But you never know. Stranger things have happened, and actually, colour-wise, it'd be the other way around in the blue corner, Taylor Swift. In the red corner, Kid Rock. Okay, he's still a thing, is he? Crikey. And John writes, the power of this woman will be shown in November, James, when she will likely keep Trump out of the White House. I suspect that Joe Biden's people would relish Donald Trump launching one of his unhinged attacks on Taylor Swift. But we're out of time. I've got 1 minute left, and I'm going to give most of it to Ali in Dartford. Ali, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. My daughter went to see her on Friday on the first night. She is a fan, but not. I wouldn't say she's a mega fan, but she had a lovely time.
Yeah.
And the word that came out of it? It's wholesome. It's really wholesome. Yes. Everybody was swapping bracelets, and it was just this lovely feel-good thing that we all kind of really need.
Yes.
And, she's been going a long time. My daughter first saw her in 2010 at the Teen Awards, so this isn't an overnight thing.
Do you know what I thought? And you've just reminded me. I don't know what you were like. Are we a similar age, or are you a bit younger than me?
I'm a bit older than you, James.
Oh, are you? You sound younger.
Thank you.
I tried too hard to be cool when I was a kid. And no one in that stadium was trying to be cool. They were all just living their best lives, weren't they? They weren't worried about what they looked like. They weren't looking over their shoulder. I mean, there were a couple who were pouting on their phones and stuff like that, but the massive, massive majority of people there, they just let it go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they were all kind of. You weren't just watching it; you were participating in it, from what I can gather. I was making friendship bracelets the night before, and I've been listening. I've been singing her songs non-stop, and I don't think only because my dog likes her, because it settles him down.
Well, you know, it is. It's. And you want final? What's the word I want? Proof of the scale of the conversation we've been having. Sheila's just shown me pictures of Paul McCartney paying homage at the
feet of
literally the feet of Taylor Swift.
Taking off Taylor Swift boots. It was in a photo shoot for Rolling Stone.
Beautiful. And so anyone sending me, and there haven't been many to be honest with you, but snidey messages about her not being that big a deal. Paul McCartney begs to differ.
Absolutely.
Can't say much fairer than
for
that.
God's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
I know. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from our app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Macca knows. Macca knows.
Macca always knows.
Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows. Macca always knows.